Hi, welcome back guys, this is your friend Caller. What if with another fiction? What if Deku had a revival Quirk and helped him become a hero now? Before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Chatter filled the air as groups of teens walked back and forth, each of them in their own cliques. A girl giggled as she pushed her friend playfully as they walked past, their words bleeding into the noise of the crowd. Someone else rode in on their skateboard, pulling up to a group of guys and doing a little kickflip with his board. The three laughed and smiled at the display, one of them wrapping an arm over his shoulder as they walked onto the school grounds, even pulling him in to give him a little noogie as a sign of affection. As more and more people walked past, it became painfully obvious that many of these people grew up with each other. They all had inside jokes and ways to make each other smile. They knew what to say and how to say it. This route was normal for them, just another Monday morning of classes and activities. But for one kid, this was so much more intimidating. A new place full of new people and unknown faces. Izuku Midoriya stood at the front gate of the school as people walked past. He fidgeted with the straps on his backpack, his eyes looking up to meet someone's face before immediately looking back at the ground again. Midoriya had always been a little small for his age, so skinny and weak-looking even at first glance. People at his old school used to joke and taunt him for it, saying that if he was a dog he would be the runt of the litter. People at his old school used to say a lot of things about him. He was dressed in an all-black uniform, something new that he has yet to get used to wearing. It was a little big for his tiny frame. Parts of it were too long for him, the entire thing looking haphazardly thrown together and foreign on his body. He honestly spent a little too long this morning staring at himself in the mirror and frowning. The green bush of hair on his head slowly swayed in the wind, anxiously combed 1,000 times, but it still came out a cluttered mess. Fidgeting a little in place, he blushed, looking up to meet the face of his mother, Midoriya. She was, ironically, even shorter than he was. His mother was not always so round and on the chubby side. There was a point in time of her youth where she was even a model. Anxieties about him at a young age and worrying over the lawsuit of Aldous seemed to have taken care of that. Stress eating is a hell of a thing. Letting out an exasperated sigh, he gestured out with his hand. Mom, please. I am going to be late for my first day. She was hovering over him again. She seemed to do that a lot nowadays. He watched as his mother opened her arms, pulling him in for the third hug of the day. Feeling her pull him down into her bosom, he blushed when he heard some laughter. She didn't seem to take notice, however, simply stroking his curly hair as she cooed at him. Oh, are you sure you're ready? So soon after Aldera? We can wait a little longer if you want. You're already joining partly into the year. What's a few more days? His face was bright red as he attempted to pry himself out of her arms, struggling against her. How is such a tiny round woman so strong? Mom, please. We already told the principal today would be my first day. Jay, just let me do this. I'll be fine. There was a pause before she reluctantly let him go, freeing him of the embarrassing mom cocoon. Looking him up and down with a nervous smile, she fiddled with her dress before letting out a tired sigh. I know. I shouldn't baby you so much. My little man is growing up so fast. I remember not long ago when we used to play hero and you would save me in your little all-might pajamas. A snort of a laugh somewhere from behind him made him flinch, not daring to look over his shoulder to see who actually heard that. He would rather not know at this point. There's no coming back from something so embarrassing like that at his age. All he could really do was run a hand through his hair and groan at her, the deep crimson blush on his face refusing to go down. Mom, don't mom me, young man. Let me have this. She huffed at him, looking him over one last time before leaning in to straighten out his tie. Smiling gently up at him, she sighed. Hurry home early tonight. Can't be late to your first self-defense class. Nodding, he returned the smile, muttering softly down at her. Okay, I'm going to let you go now, but you have to promise me something. Promise me that from now on you won't just take things lying down. I don't even want to know how long you kept the bullying hidden from me. He winced at that. Yeah, not his best moment. Whether she noticed or not, she didn't say, simply continued on. You are such a kind and wonderful boy, Izuku. Anyone that can't see that can fuck off. He sputtered at that, staring wide-eyed at his mother like she grew a second head. She never cursed before. Mom. She let out a laugh, smiling gently at him before getting serious. Promise me, Izuku. Looking down at his mother, he could see the faint hint of tears starting to form. He always hated the sight of his mother crying. It always made him want to cry too. Blinking back his own tears, he smiled through it. Okay, I promise. She pulled him in for another hug, but this time he didn't fight her, simply wrapping his arms around her and welcoming her deep embrace. She whispered in his ear, like telling a secret only he could know. That's my boy. I love you very much, Izuku. I love you too, Mom. If only for a single span of time. Wrapped in his mother's warm embrace, Midoriya felt his anxieties fade away. At that moment, even if the entire school was laughing at him, he would not have cared. All that mattered at that moment was his mom. If he was a few minutes late to his first day back to school, he's sure it wouldn't be that big of a deal. Taking a seat in her normal spot, Kyukajiru let out a small groan. It was way too early to be dealing with being awake. Raising a hand, she rubbed at her temple, her eyes squinting against the far to bright light of the morning class. All around her, people chatted amongst themselves, talking about what they did last weekend or just doing small talk. Placing an earbud into her ear, she scrolled through some songs on her phone, trying to find something to drown out the noise. Hey, this was a good one. Pressing play, she closed her eyes, gently tapping her foot to the beat. Ever since her quirk came in at a young age, Jiru was able to hear everything around her, whether she wanted to or not. Every whisper, every snide remark or cruel joke. It became increasingly hard for people to lie or keep things from her. There was even a time where her folks couldn't talk about birthday or Christmas presents in the house without her hearing it. In a weird way, she knew everything that went on around her, which made her childhood increasingly hard. Things like Santa, the Easter Bunny, or the Tooth Fairy were discovered to be lies early on, which was devastating for younger her. She weirdly enough found herself being the center of attention growing up, surrounded by people who loved to gossip and talk about people behind their back. There was always someone trying to find out if their crush had a crush on them or if someone in their group was lying. It was completely exhausting. The commotion died down around her, telling her that class was about to start. Taking her earphones out, she set them back into the case just in time to see her teacher walk in. Mr. Hiro was a soft-spoken, portly man that Jiru knew pretty well. He was the main teacher she went to learn math from. She had no idea what he was talking about most of the time, but there was just something about how his eyes sparkled and how his mustache turned upward when he talked about fractions that made her want to listen to him talk forever. The man was maybe a little too kind and a little too smart for the type of school he was in. Turning to watch the portly man walk into the room, she noticed someone else walked behind him. The kid was small ... well, not smaller than her, but most people weren't as small as she was. He walked with a lack of confidence. His back was hunched and his shoulders raised. His backpack was so big compared to his body that it was comical. He reminded her of a small green turtle that she once saw at the aquarium with her parents. He had a wavy patch of green hair on his head that made her think of the bushes she sometimes walks past on her way to school, and cute little freckles dotted in a star pattern over what she dare say were very pinchable cheeks. He was kind of cute ... I in a lost puppy kind of way. Her jacks wiggled when she heard some faint laughter from behind her, making her frown. Oh great, new kid is already getting bad attention. The kid's been here for a whole 5 minutes and someone was already making fun of him. Swallowing the uncomfortable feeling back down, she continued to face forward. Ignore them. Ignore the mean words and harsh tones ... At the end of the day, it's none of her business. She had always stayed afloat by staying out of people's drama and hiding in the background. Now was not going to be any different. Mr. Hiro cleared his throat before speaking, gently patting the new kid on the back. Listen up everyone, this here is Mr. Midoriya. Mr. Midoriya just transferred here from a different school. Please treat him with all of the respect you'd give to your other classmates. I will not tolerate bullying or harassment of any type, both in here and out of class. Do I make myself clear? Raising an eyebrow, Jiru heard a chorus of dismissal yeses around her. Mr. Hiro was never strict like that before. There wasn't a single hint of the jovial tone she usually heard when he spoke. For whatever reason, he was super protective of this kid. Taking a step back, Mr. Hiro gestured with his hand for the Midoriya kid to say something. Watching him take a step forward, she could practically hear the beat of his heart from here, a quick moving piston beating frantic and erratic. Despite this, Midoriya stood straight, a bright smile spreading across his face. She almost had to squint against the vibrancy of his smile. Hello, my name is Izuku Midoriya. I like comics and learning about quirks. He bent down to bow to them, his green shaggy hair covering his face. Can you please take good care of me? Walking along the street, Izuku's red shoes scraped against the concrete. Looking up, he scanned the buildings, his gaze drifting down to a piece of paper held within his hands before looking back up at the buildings again. 1977 Yavin Drive. 1977 Yavin Drive. Muttering softly to himself, his green eyes jumped from number to number. There's 1970 Yavin. .1972 Yavin ... on 1977 Yavin. Pausing his steps, he looked up at the building with a raised eyebrow before looking down at the flyer again. The front of the flyer being an illustration of an orange closed fist raised to the sky, the text reading Kendo Family Dojo. Looking back up at the building, he tilted his head slightly. Staring back at him was a 2-story building in between 2 separate apartment complexes. A rocky path snaked down the center of the walkway, grass lining both sides. The front of the building was a big sliding door with the same fist logo illustrated onto it with orange paint. The logo looked old and faded, like it desperately needed a touch-up. He could see steps to the far right that looked like they wound around and went up to the 2nd floor. 4 big pillars sat at each corner of the building, the same painted orange as the logo. The building wasn't run down per se ... just a little on the dirty side. The windows were slightly dusty, and there wasn't a single person in sight ... If he was honest, the place seemed more like a home than a dojo. Standing in front of the door, he raised a hand to knock but paused. Was this really the place his mom wants him to learn self-defense at? A loud bang made him jump almost a foot into the air, wiping around quickly to see the source of the noise. Coming down the steps to his right was a washing machine, shifting from side to side down a handful of steps. He could hear the faint sound of grunts as it went down. It looked like someone was trying to move it, but that was crazy. Who would try to move a washing machine by themselves? As he watched it move along, he saw arms wrapped around it and the faint glimpse of orange hair peeking up from up top. Eyes widening a little, he dropped his bags, quickly jogging up to help them. Running up to the other side, he bent down, sliding his hands under it. Hey, do you need help? He couldn't see the person, but from the sound of her voice she sounded relieved. Oh, yes please. I'll get one side if you get the other. Giving a nod, he shifted his weight, bending at the knees in a strained attempt to help her move the heavy metal box. How in the world was she moving this on her own? He was struggling when it was just the two of them. Slowly but steadily they walked it down the steps, one step at a time. Leading it down, they pulled it onto the grass, Izuku's lack of muscles flexing under the strain until they set it back down. Oh, thank God. Rubbing at his arms, he practically collapsed against the grass with a groan. Staring up at the blue sky, he panted, muttering under his ragged breath. Finally, now I can die. Common, it wasn't that bad, you big baby, the stranger spoke. Turning his head, he finally got a glimpse of who the voice belonged to. Staring down at him with pretty teal eyes was a girl about his age. She had bright orange hair tied into a ponytail, a black tank top covered in some kind of grime, and a bandage placed on her right cheek. Speckles of dirt covered her face as she smirked at him. Opening his mouth, he closed it again as she stared back at him. Oh no. He's never talked to a girl before. His mind was racing, trying to think of something, anything to say. It had gotten to a point where he was starting to panic. Say something, you fool. Gee girl, not like that. Say something smarter. Snorting, she smirked down at him, placing her hands on her hips. Oh yeah, last time I checked I was still a girl. Shaking her head, her ponytail swayed from side to side before she reached a hand down to help him up, a hand he quickly grabbed. You okay, dude? You didn't hit your head or something lifting that, did you? Izuku couldn't help but blush as she pulled him back to his feet, gently patting his shoulders. He heard many stories about how soft girl hands were. Hell, his own mother would drill into his head at a young age how he had to be gentle with girls, how they were, quote, dainty creatures, and how he needed to always be a gentleman to them, but her hands felt so rough and calloused. He had no doubt this girl could beat him up. And no, I'm okay. I'm always like this. I mean, not always, only sometimes always. Great, he was rambling again. The girl let him ramble a little too long, simply shifting her weight as she watched the train wreck of this one-way conversation. It was probably really entertaining to look at like a man fumbling a ball only to catch it and then fumble it again. Are you done? Or should I give you a few more minutes? I'm done now. Slapping her hands together, she gave him a crooked smirk. Great. So what brings you here? Choking on his words, he couldn't help but blush, simply nodding as he handed her the crumbled flyer in his hand. Taking it from him, she looked it over before smiling genuinely at him. You must be Midoriya. Your mom called ahead to let us know that you were coming. She did say you were a little on the skittish side. Turning, she walked up to the front door, grabbing onto the big handle, her arm flexing as she pulled it open. A low rust-covered scrapping sound came from the door as it slowly grinded open, not really giving him a chance to scamp after her as she walked inside. The entrance gave way to a mat-covered floor leading into a narrow hallway. On the dirt floor before the mat were many groups of shoes of all shapes and sizes. Bending down, he started to take off his shoes before realizing that his guide didn't even bother, simply walking straight onto the mat flooring with her shoes still on. She didn't even look over her shoulder to see if he was still following her. Frantically taking his red shoes off, he practically flung them with the others before chasing after her. As he followed after her, he could hear her voice as they walked, her back to him the entire time. Her walk was so much stronger and more confident compared to his own. You're a little early, but I'll let it slide for the first day. You're in luck. We're supposed to have a good group today. Heading down a winding hallway, he scanned the environment, his gaze flickering to framed pictures lining the walls. They looked to be pictures of the Kendo family, pictures of big groups of people and happy smiles. Looking them over, his gaze stopped at a single frame in the back. It was of a taller, buff-looking man with long orange-red hair. He looked to be surrounded by other family, even having his guide's head in a headlock and giving her a noogie ... But weirdly enough, his face was scratched out. His face was the only one scratched out. Jolting at the sound of his guide's voice, he realized that he stopped walking, quickly running after her. Name's Itsuka Kendo, but in this dojo you can call me Itsuka. Sputter at what she said, he shook his head. I can't do that. Stopping at a sliding door, she turned to look back at him before laughing. Trust me ... It's going to be really confusing otherwise. Before he could question what she meant, she already swung the door open. Almost immediately he was assaulted by noise. There was so much of it, it was hard to pinpoint what it all was. This must have been the living part of the dojo. It was chaos. As they made their way down some steps, the hall made way to the living room. An older man sat in a rocking chair, absent-mindedly watching an old black and white samurai movie. To the right of the living room, there was a kitchen connected to the same room. An older woman seemed to be cutting something. She gently smiled down at the food as she chopped away with a level of skill he's never seen with a knife before. She looked almost identical to Itsuka. She must have been Itsuka's mom. Ada, her older sister. The sink next to her was going off and pouring an endless stream of water into the sink. In the distance, he could hear the sound of a dog barking in the backyard. Following Itsuka farther into the room, he jumped back as two younger twins ran past with fake swords, screaming loudly as they stabbed at each other. They had to be only 10 at least. Itsuka turned to smile at them as they ran past, playfully calling after them. "Hey you two, no playing swords in the house. If you two break another vase, there's no saving you from mom." "Is that Itsuka I hear?" The new voice could be heard in a branching hallway away from the living room. An older, slightly chubbier man looking to be in his 30s coming out of it with a smile. Heading for them, he shouted at them. "Itsuka, did you see what happened to the washing machine? It's broken and I was planning on taking it out front to fix it." Looking back at him smugly, she smirked. "Way ahead of you, old man. I just took it out front. By yourself. And who you calling old man? I remember when I was your age not long ago. 20 years ago maybe." "What? No, it wasn't that long ago." Watching these two fire off at each other back and forth, Midoriya found himself unable to join the conversation, only able to turn to the person talking. Turning to look at him, the older man smiled, reaching a hand out to shake his. "How's it going? Name's Matsuo Kendo. I'm Itsuka's uncle." Nice of Itsuka to finally bring a boyfriend along. Blushing deeply, he attempted to stutter out a response before watching Itsuka jump into the conversation. "God please, can you not say that to every boy you see me with? Just ignore him, Midoriya. He thinks he's funny." Looking between the two with their smirky smiles, he could definitely see the resemblance. Hello. My name is Izuku Midoriya. It's nice to meet you, Ken. Or Matsuo, sir." It was at the moment Izuku realized what Itsuka meant when they first walked into the room. He can't call her Kendo because everyone here was a Kendo. Patting him roughly on the shoulders, Matsuo barked out a laugh. "A little on the skittish side, ain't ya? Don't worry. A little time in our family will fix that." Itsuka pulled him along before he could say more. He was thrust before another person and another person. And another person. People came and went from this living room so much his head span. It's not that they weren't nice, there was just so many of them. How they all managed to live in this tiny building was beyond him. If he remembers it all right, Itsuka Kendo has a dad, a mom, an uncle, 2 younger siblings, 2 cousins, and a dog named Kojo. There was no way he was going to remember all of their names the first time he met them. It was easy to remember the dog's name though. Until finally, after all of the introductions, after what felt like forever, he was slid into a chair next to the old man watching the samurai movie. The old man continued to watch the movie. The image of a man getting sliced and falling off of a bridge appearing on the screen. "Why are you here, Mr. Midoriya?" His voice was harsh and grainy, worn down over the years by age. "I'm here for my self-defense classes. I am sorry for being early, I just wanted to make sure I could find the plot." Cutting him off, the older man turned to him with a harsh gaze. "No, not that. Tell me why I should teach you, Midoriya. Why do you want to get stronger?" Why does he want to get stronger? The question made him blink. Staring at the movie play, he sat and thought. Why did he want to get stronger? He was out of Aldera. They couldn't hurt him anymore. He was free of the jeering, free of Bakugo and his lackeys beating him up every day. He should be happy to be out of that environment, but he's not. Looking down at his hand, he clenched it. He thought of his mother's crying face when his father left, the face that she tried to hide behind closed doors. He thought about Bakugo pushing himself, constantly breaking his body when he was sure no one was looking. There was a time years ago where he really looked up to Bakugo. People always praised his quirk, but Izuku always found that Bakugo's dedication and drive was something more worth praising than his power. But his rage controlled his actions, his power more akin to a volcano than a man. What was the point of strength if all it did was create people like Bakugo? People who aren't afraid to abuse the weak just because they view them as lesser. Maybe it's true that power corrupts absolutely. A flash of a memory. He thought of All Might pulling people from a wreckage with a smile on his face. That's right. There was a person not corrupted by power. Someone he looked up to above everyone else. Looking over at the old man, he gave him the most serious look he could. He had made a decision. All he had to do now is let the man know. As I am now, I'm not strong enough. I can't even protect myself. Let alone the important people in my life. I need to be better. The entire family watched the interaction from afar. Kendo's mom and dad were smiling at them. Her cousin had stopped roughhousing to stare. Even the dog had stopped barking. Itsuka Kendo smiling a little more genuinely at the small boy. A faint hint of red dusted her cheeks. 2 samurais stood on a hill staring each other down as tense music played from the TV screen. The old man looked him over with eyes full of experience and wisdom. Smiling, he took his walking cane before getting up from the couch, reaching a hand out to take his. "I'm sure you will be Mr. Midoriya. Welcome to the Kendo family dojo." Air escaped his lungs as he fell back against the mat, Izuku letting out a coughing sputter as he placed a hand on his chest where he was just hit. "Oh, that one really hurt." Staring up at the ceiling, he could hear shouting to his left. The ref, raising a hand, pointed to his opponent. "Match point, Okawa Kazuki." When Kendo said before a good group, she apparently meant around 10 students of differing ages and backgrounds. Staring at one of the mat-covered walls, he let out a groan as he sat up from his spot on the ground, staring off a little in space as he thought. Izuku had yet to get the full story ... but apparently years ago the Kendo family dojo was a dojo worth revering. They were one of the most famous dojos in the Chiba prefecture until something happened around 8 or so years ago. He tried to look up more on the subject online after his first day, but he couldn't find anything concrete. Whatever the incident was, the dojo mostly survived off of scraps after. Everything he looked up mostly seemed like hearsay ... Hell, some of the other dojo even scoff at the name Kendo whenever it's brought up. Turning his head to the left, he watched as his opponent, an upperclassman of the Kendo dojo, raised a fist into the air with a big smile. Then there was the matter of Okawa Kazuki. Born into a rich family, Okawa Kazuki had already made a name for himself in the martial arts world. Even at a young age, he was known for showing up at competitions and cleaning house. Running a hand through his long black hair, he laughed at something someone said, his teeth a perfect white. Kazuki was taller than him, bigger than him ... and more talented than him. He even heard rumors that he was born with a really powerful quirk, a quirk that he sure did wonders for his ego. He was everything Izuku was not. Frowning at the thought, he shook his head, slowly starting to get up. None of that mattered. He wasn't here to be the best ... He was here to learn to protect himself. Nothing more. Turning to the group of people, Kazuki gave a little wink to a few of the girls in their ranks before flexing. He was clearly showboating a little for his third win in a row today. Not that Izuku was counting or anything. Walking up to him, Kazuki reached out a hand to his sprawled out form like he was offering to help Izuku up, but only smacked his hand away when Izuku reached for him. Smirking down at him cockily, Kazuki let out a chuckle, shaking his head as he started to head back to the group. It was faint, but Izuku could hear him mutter under his breath, just loud enough for him to hear. "Nice try, maybe next time, loser." "Ah, okay ... He was a sore winner too." Getting up, he rubbed at his shoulder, slowly making his way back to their group. 2 people walking past him onto the mat to start their match. He could hear the start of another match behind him as he made his way over to the table with water bottles. Taking one, he greedily chugged more than half of the cold beverage in one gulp. "Not bad with Kazuki, Midoriya. You almost had him." Not noticing Kendo walk up until she spoke, he jumped a little, turning around quickly to stare at her, his face bright red. She was now dressed in the dojo's gi, her wrist covered in protective wrapping. Picking a bottle up from the table, he tossed it to her, watching as she grabbed it easily before sitting down next to him. Running a hand through his curly hair, he frowned. Please don't lie to me, Kendo. He destroyed me out there. I didn't even land a single clean hit on him. How many times do I have to tell you to call me Itsuka?" Raising a hand, she gave him a light chop to the head before smiling softly at him. "You need to not be so hard on yourself. You've only been here a few months. Kazuki has been doing this since he was a baby. The fact that you swung at him at all is praiseworthy. Most people here don't even try against him ... Just roll over like he's some untouchable thing." Giving her a nod, he took another sip of his water, turning to watch Kazuki flirt with some girls nearby. "He has won a few medals." "Oh yeah, so have I." Looking at the same spot he was, Kendo rolled her yes, turning to look back at him, almost needing to squint against the blinding smile that Izuku gave her. "Yeah, but that's because you're amazing. How you have yet to beat him is beyond me." "Yeah." Blushing slightly, she turned away to chug the rest of her bottle else she go blind from the sight. Shaking her head to will the blush down, her hand grew, easily crushing the finished water bottle in between her fingers. "Just means you and I have to try even harder to beat him." She was just so confident. He couldn't help but smile a little more before pausing. Heya, Kendo." Itsuka, feeling his cheeks get hot, he gave a nod. "Alright, anyway. I just wanted to know ... what your quirk is." "My quirk? Why yeah, I don't think we've ever talked about it before." For the first time since he's known Kendo, Izuku saw her act ... shy. Embarrassed, she was staring at the ground now, lightly tugging at the arm of her karate gi. After a few seconds, she muttered softly, "I can make my hands grow. I know it's not the best power, but it's all that I..." "That's so cool," he exclaimed to her, her gaze snapping up to stare at him. "You can make your hands grow bigger and lift stuff. That's so amazing. If the quirk was just about growing mass, you wouldn't be able to lift your own hands after they got big, but since you probably can, that would mean that it would have some type of super strength tied into it. Is there specific sizes you have to change to, or can you do any size you want?" I wonder if the strength part of your quirk is tied to the size. Maybe you should practice only growing your hands a little and see how much strength your quirk gives you. Midoriya, will you give me a second too? A quirk like that could do more than just punch stuff. You can use it to move wreckage as long as you were careful. Imagine being able to slide your arm into a small crevice and then making your hand big enough to just lift a chunk up. Izuku, muttering to himself, he was starting to talk so fast it was getting harder and harder to even understand him anymore. Reaching a hand forward, she poked his nose, his muttering stopping before looking over to stare at her with a blush. The sight of his confused face was kinda funny. Letting out a laugh, Kendo smirked at him. Is that your stop button? Do I just have to poke you on the nose whenever I want to turn to talk? Embarrassment washed over him like a tidal wave, his eyes snapping open, followed by a sharp pain of anxiety shooting through him. Why are you muttering to yourself, freak? His heartbeat quickened, frantically looking around the room. I hear he keeps a bunch of journals about people in our class. Wait, really? That's so weird. Please no, not again. His heartbeat quickened. Closing his eyes, he could feel tears start to form. A big group of eyes watching him, judging him. No. Eyes shooting open, he felt Kendo hit his shoulder. Looking around, he noticed that no one was really looking at him. There wasn't a big group of judging eyes watching his every move. A new match was going on from when he first sat down, and everyone for the most part was focusing on the match itself. There were a few people giving him weirded outlooks, but after a few seconds they looked back at the ring. He hadn't seemed to have done much harm to his very lacking reputation. Looking back to Kendo, she was watching him with a confused eyebrow raised. I am sorry. I didn't mean to ... It happens sometimes. I swear I'm completely normal and not. Whoa, hey, Midoriya. It's cool. I was just teasing a little. Raising both of her hands, she waved them in a vain attempt to calm him down. It's honestly kinda cool how passionate you are about quirks. Most people don't show that kind of passion for anything in their life. Really? Nodded. She smiled genuinely at him. Really? Returning the smile, he couldn't help but blush slightly at the way she was looking at him. It was so different than how other people looked at him. Opening his mouth to say something, he was interrupted by a shout far off. Kendo, you're up. Looking back at him, she shrugged, giving him a playful smirk. Raising a fist, she lightly punched his shoulder again before getting up to walk towards the ring. All right already. I'm coming. Everyone get back. I'm gonna show you ladies how it's really done. He watched her as she interacted with the others, smiling big and laughing when someone said something funny. Kendo was so amazing. She was so strong and talented, so fun and full of life. Whenever he saw her smile, he couldn't help but feel at ease. Kind of like how All Might's smile made him feel. He had no doubt that she would make an amazing hero one day. But she worried so much for him. She reminded him of his mother in that right. Squeezing the pants of his gi, he sighed before getting up to join the group again. He just had to get stronger, strong enough that he wouldn't worry anyone ever again. God, look at him trying to do a pull-up. What a weak loser. Sweat dripped onto the floor as he swung his fist, the bag shifting under the blow. Give up already, Deku. You're as weak as it comes. Not in a million years could you beat me. His fist stung, but he refused to stop. Another blow shook the bag. What the hell are you going to do with a quirk like that? Heal my cavities. Gritting his teeth, his fist colliding with the bag, a sharp pain moving across his fist. Shaking his hand, he lightly cursed before raising his fist again for another punch, only pausing when he heard the door behind him open. Kendo's voice making him turn towards her. Geez, out here again, huh? You know everyone went home already. I know. I just wanted to stay back and practice a little more. She stared at him for a moment, giving him that look again. The one she always gave him when she was worried for him. He wondered if she was going to scold him this time. She seemed to think on what to say for a moment before sighing, placing her hands on her hips. Well, common, dinner's ready. Mom made your favorite. Perking up a little, he gave her a bright smile, jogging over to meet her at the doorway. All right, Katsuden. Before he could walk through the door, he realized too late that he fell for her trap. Kendo reached forward, grabbing onto his wrist and pulled his hand up to look at it with a frown. Huffing, she turned and started to yank him down the hall. How many times do I have to tell you to properly wrap your hands? You can mess up your knuckles if you aren't careful. Kendo, don't pull me so hard. I can't keep up. You should have thought of that before ignoring my warnings. Again, giving him a yank for good measure, she pulled him down another hall and into the bathroom. You big idiot. Setting him down on the toilet, she started to grab things from under the sink. Fishing out some antiseptic, she kneeled down, dabbing it onto a cloth before touching his fist with the cloth. Immediately pain hit him, his teeth clenching as he instinctively tried to pull his hand away, her hand holding his wrist tightly in place. Oh, he muttered. Yes, this is what happens when you don't listen to me. Things shut up. I'm still mad at you. It was quiet after that, Kendo tending to his knuckles while he sat in contemplative silence, like a child that was just scolded. Flinching at her wrapping his knuckles, he wanted to say something, but he's pretty sure she didn't want to hear a word from him right now. Turning, he stared at a big poster on the wall. The big text said "Rumble in the Cage" in all bold, the image being two big massive men running at each other head to head. He had heard about Quirk wrestling before but never really got into it. From what he knew, about a decade ago the Chiba prefecture was secretly run by underground fighting rings. People with powerful quirks that would fight and sometimes die, all in the name of money and fame. Apparently it was a really dark time in the history of Chiba. Eventually the police and pro heroes started to crack down on the fighting rings hard. That, funny enough, is how Mirko made her debut. Her and a few underground heroes ended up completely ripping up the roots of the underground syndicate, grinded the whole shadowy organization into dust. A few years later Quirk wrestling came to be. It was originally feared to be underground fighting rings taking hold again, but that fear was quickly dismissed. Quirk wrestling was fake. It was big buff men in tights throwing themselves around a ring to practical effects. It was long-winded speeches and, dare he say, very cheesy dialogue ... and that's coming from him. Izuku never really saw the point in watching Quirk wrestling when real-life heroes fought villains all of the time. It was more a soap opera than anything pertaining to actual fighting, which is why it boggled his mind so much that Izuku Kendo, winner of multiple martial arts tournaments, Izuku Kendo, the same Kendo who had a wall in her room littered with trophies, liked Quirk wrestling. She mentioned once that it was something that her and her dad bonded over, but it still confused him even now, after knowing her for about half of a year. Looking back to her as she finished up her wrappings, he figured it was long enough that she wasn't super angry at him anymore. Remind me why you like Quirk wrestling again. Ugh, this again. Giving an annoyed sigh, he could see a little upturn of her lip. Look, it's fun, okay? You would know if you actually watched it with me. Again, I failed to see how that could be fun. You know it's not real, right? Standing back up, she raised her arms in the air, turning to put the stuff away. Of course I know. Everyone knows it's not real. It's one of the worst kept secrets. Then what's the point? Look, I like the rivalries, okay? For some reason he frowned at that, his mind immediately thinking about Kaken again. In what world do you think I would ever train with a loser like you? You'll only drag me down. Looking back down at his bruised knuckles, he rubbed his arm, his gaze looking to the floor. Rivalries. Yeah. Her back was turned to him so she couldn't see his face as she spoke. There's just something about two people pushing themselves to be better that I like. It isn't exactly mean per se, just harsh. Sometimes rivals know each other better than even friends do. His gaze flickered back to her as she finished up putting everything away. The word rolled around in his head tilting slightly as his mind drifted. This entire time he thought rivals were something to be feared, someone strong pushing around someone weaker than them. But maybe he had it all wrong. He thinks he might like Kendo's version more. Watching her finish putting the stuff away, she slapped her hands again. Rivals, Kanpai. People shouted all at once, slamming glasses together. The room was filled with merriment, a long table almost splitting the room in half, chairs scattered about on both sides. The entire Kendo family was there, all plus one more. Izuku Midoriya sat in his seat. Every once in a while he would flinch at a loud bang or slam as people ate. He learned early on that dinners at the Kendo family household were very different than dinners with his mom. There was a lot more touching, for one thing. Playful shoves and punches, headlocks, noogies, shoulder smacks. Even from the outside looking in, you could see how Kendo ended up so touchy-feely. Why she liked giving hugs as much as she did. Or even why she would hang off of him so much. The newest one she did a few days ago was she placed her chin on top of his head when his back was turned to her, most likely to make fun of how short he was. Turning, he watched Tota Kendo, Itsuka's dad, chug a bottle as his brother Matsuo cheered him on. The twins Sora and Yuki were fighting over a single fork with food on it, loudly trying to shout over each other while Itsuka's mom and aunt talked with each other near the sink about Ren's third pregnancy. Jumping a little in place, he was suddenly pulled into a side hug by one of Itsuka's older cousins, practically shoving his face into her chest as she purred. So Izuku, right? How old did you say you were again? Face bright red, he yelped, barely squeaking out a response. S16, ma'am. Oh, well, where's the fun in calling me ma'am? For you, sweetheart, you can call me Eka. Sitting up some, Itsuka leaned in to point her chopsticks threateningly at her cousin. Hey, what did I say before? No flirting with my friends. Oh, poo, Itsuka, you're no fun. Letting out a hearty laugh, Matsuo turned towards them, no longer entertained by his brother. So you're a year older than Itsuka then. That made Itsuka pause, turning to stare at him with a raised eyebrow. Wait, I thought we were the same age. Well, I just had mine last month. Wait, what? Midoriya, why didn't you tell me? I didn't even get you anything. Slamming her palms onto the table, it shook a little, only making the family laugh louder. The booming voice of Tota rocked the room, the mountain of a man letting out a laugh. Lay off of him, Itsuka. You coddle him too much. Let the boy have some privacy. If you both went to the same school, people would start to think that you two were conjoined at the hip. Itsuka was glaring at him now, the heat almost unbearable. Sitting up more straight, Izuku waved his hand to and fro in an attempt to stop her from glaring at him. She was going to kick his ass after this, wasn't she? It's okay. It was mostly my mom and I spending time together. What? You ain't got friends other than Izuku? Looking down at the table, he shook his head. No sir. We moved less than a year ago. Matsuo looked him up and down with a frown. Got a dad? No. My dad left for America years ago, but it's okay. It's been so long I've honestly starting to forget his face at this point. Coming back to the table, Itsuka's mom, Hada, sat down. It's just you and your mom then. Basically, Hada turned to her husband and they both exchanged looks before she gave a nod, turning to look at him again. I'm sorry to hear that, sweetheart. It's okay. Lowering his chopsticks, he picked at his food, popping some of it into his mouth. It honestly was okay. It happened so long ago it doesn't even faze him anymore. Even so, he couldn't help but feel a little bad after words were said, the air in the room changing a little more somber. A startled yelp made the whole family turn to see Yuki holding a bleeding finger. Her big eyes were staring down at it with tears starting to form. Next to her, her brother Sora was crying, the fork that they were fighting over laying on the ground. Everyone seemed to act all at once, the sound of chairs scooting back to back as everyone got up. Toda had gotten up and went into the bathroom for band-aids while Hada ran over to check on her children. Oh sweetheart, what happened? Are you okay? Leaning down, Hada lovingly caressed her crying children. It's okay. Dad is going to go get some band-aids and we'll get you patched right up. Actually, I think I could help. Izuku stood up, slowly making his way past everyone to lean down to Yuki's level with a smile, trying to give her the most comforting look he could. If you'll let me, Yuki. She seemed to stop crying now, staring at him with her big eyes before giving a small nod, taking her tiny hand, and as he turned it over to look at the wound, it looked like a minor cut, nothing too crazy. Raising a hand, he waved it, his hand closing before popping open with a spark. Flickering from his hand was a bright jade-colored flame, the green fire dancing along his fingers like a silent dance. At first, Yuki jerked away a little at the sight, but when the fire touched her, she realized that the fire didn't hurt, only embrace her with a warm comfort. Standing around, the Kendo family watched wide-eyed as Izuku slid a burning hand along her finger, holding it for a second before pulling it away. The cut completely healed. Taking a breath, Izuku's finger stung like he just cut it, but there was no sign of injury on his body. Yuki sat there stunned, her eyes looking from him to her finger and then back to him again. Lunging forward, she wrapped her tiny arms around him into a hug, whispering softly against him. THNKU. Smiling softly down at her, he blinked his eyes, trying to stop himself from crying before giving a small nod. Anytime, little bean. A hand belonging to Hada pat his shoulder with a smile, whispering softly to him, thank you. Oh, of course. Standing back up, Yuki had yet to let him go, simply clinging to his chest like a little koala. Turning, he blushed at the sight of a wave of teal eyes looking at him from all over the room. Toda stood in the doorway with a handful of band-aids with his brother next to him. Eika and Ren stood with her hands together, cooing on how cute that all was, while Eri was standing nearby with his hands crossed and smirk on his face. Their eyes met and he gave Izuku a thumbs up. The only person not standing was the elder Dai, simply watching in his seat with raised eyebrows before taking a sip of his tea. Looking over the group of people, he stopped at Itsuka. She was giving him that look again, the gently smile she gave him sometimes that made his stomach tighten. Blushing, he turned away, walking back with Yuki clinging to him as he sat in his usual spot, going back to eating his food. There was a pause before everyone started shouting all at once. Sitting on the doorstep of the Kendo home, the sun had already started to set, the small amount of orange slightly peeking over the cityscape. Izuku sat with his back to the brightness of the house, staring up at the small amount of stars flickering in the sky. He never got to see any stars back home. Just another way that living in the Chiba prefecture was better. He never would have imagined he'd be surrounded by so many fun and amazing people. Some days he couldn't help but feel that he didn't deserve the Kendo family. The door creaked behind him, the sound of footsteps coming up behind before Itsuka sat next to him. Man, that was pretty crazy in there. She sighed. Hell yeah, pretty crazy. Turning to smirk at him, she put her cheek in her hand. I think you made your way all the way up to the top of Yuki's favorite person list. Letting out a laugh, he smiled, rubbing at his neck. Why, yeah, I noticed. She wouldn't let go of me for the rest of dinner. I don't think anyone was going to give you peace after a stunt like that. Nodding, he sighed, his eyes closing as he laid back, the warm June wind blowing his green hair in the wind. Kendo stared at him, her gaze focused on his face. He looked nice when he wasn't freaking out or stuttering. Midoriya. What colleges are you going to shoot for? Eyes opening, he looked over to her with his bright green eyes. What college? MHMM. Sighing, he rolled his neck before sitting up, tucking his knees into his chest. I don't know. Well, were you going to go to school for quirk theory? Medicine? You can do a lot of good as a nurse or a doctor with a quirk like that. I guess. Huffing at him, she threw her head from side to side, repeating what he said in a mocking tone. I guess. Hearing a snort from him made her smile. I don't know, Kendo. I guess. He paused, thinking about something for a second. I always wanted to be a hero ... like All Might. But heroes have to fight villains too, and I'm so weak, small, frail, she offered. All of the above. Now it was her time to sit in contemplative silence, her head turning to look at the city line. Did you know there was a point when I was younger where I could only grow one finger at a time? His eyes were on her as she smiled at the memory. I remember being so frustrated by the whole thing. I practiced every day trying to push myself to my limit. I did it so much my hands were too sore to do anything. In the end it did no good ... but then something happened. My parents took me to a motorcycle show out in the city. That was probably the most fun I've ever had. It was there, watching motorcycle tricks for the first time, that I realized that I was so focused on trying to get better that I was missing out on all of the fun new things in my life. Do you know what happened after that? He shook his head. I did it. I don't know how, but one day I made a breakthrough and now I can do it all of the time. What I'm trying to say is, it's okay to not know what you're going to do yet. Don't rush it. I'll still be here when you figure it out. Smiling at each other, there was the faint hint of red over both of their cheeks, enjoying the serene silence between them, only for a loud honk to interrupt the moment. Both of them jumped in place, turning fast to the noise. A car idly parked nearby, Inko's head sticking out of the window as she waved at them with a coy smile on her face. Gee, guess that's for me, he muttered softly. Gee, guess so. Watching her wave at them, Kendo swallowed the embarrassment, coughing into her hand before waving back. I'll see you after school tomorrow, Midoriya. Turning, Kendo went back inside, leaving Midoriya with a very horn-happy mother. Huffing, he walked down the steps, squinting at every horn that came from the car. Hooking around the right side, he hopped into the passenger side door. Turning to look at him with a mischievous gaze, she gave him a coy smirk. So ... that's Kendo, huh? Good to see you too, Mom. Blowing into a whistle, a group of teens ran past the gym teacher, moving laps around him in a big circle. The coach stood on the sidelines, because of course he was. Pointing his chubby finger into the air, he yelled at someone who stopped for a second to breathe. Why is that man like this? Does he have no power in his own life that he feels the need to yell at a bunch of kids? Or perhaps he was just too stuck in his ways to change. Panting, sweat clung to Jiru's clothes as she ran. Her breathing labored and short, her short bob of purple hair shifting as she ran, the jacks hanging from her ears swaying to and fro. Looking up at the sky, she squinted against the bright heat beaming down at her like a spotlight. Maybe if she glared hard enough, the sun would just fizzle out. That would be a hell of a news article. Local punk girl glares at sun until it goes out. World plunged into darkness. More at 11. She stopped for a second, her hands going to her knees as she took a breather, drops of sweat dripping down onto the asphalt. Looking up just in time, she watched that nerdy kid Midoriya pass her again, jogging past her before looping around for another lap. What the hell was with this kid? She figured the first time she saw him that he was on the weaker side ... and he was, at first. The first few times the gym teacher made them run, he lagged barely behind her. Almost as pathetic as she was ... but now, the kid was a beast. Well ... not exactly a beast. He still wasn't better than a good chunk of their class, but he improved so quickly. She watched him from afar as he would run, pushing himself to the brink just to fall over, get up and do it again. The kid's stamina was impressive if anything else. It's only been around 8 months since he joined their school, but he improved so much in so little time. She had yet to decide on if it was inspiring or disheartening, especially since they both started at the same starting line. He must be doing something after school to get in shape this fast. Running her wet palms along her gym shorts, she started to run again, mostly ignoring the shouts of her obnoxious gym teacher, instead facing straight ahead. She can't just be outdone by some stuttering weirdo, could she? She was so focused ahead she hardly noticed a group of girls nearby, only really noticing them after one of them stick their leg out when she passed, tripping her to the ground. They all laughed as they watched her tumble before continuing on their trek. Staring up at the sky, she frowned, her body sprawled out and her right knee starting to hurt. This was normal for her ... She never really got along with the other girls. When word got out that Jiru could hear everything around her, she got the wrong type of attention, and when she refused to play their little games, the attention turned toxic pretty fast. It's crazy how fast people turn on you when they think you might have dirt on them. Sitting up, she cursed a little, raising her injured knee up to get a better look at it. It didn't look too bad, just scraped up a little. Traces of blood dotted across her knee. Hurt like hell though. Slowly standing up, Jiru made her way to the teacher slowly. Trying to get his attention, she waved her arm. Yo, I fell down. I need to go see the nurse. The man looked down at her with a judgmental eye before turning away with a scoff. You're fine. Obviously not. You can see blood. The man looked back at her again, giving her a once-over before huffing, like she was ruining his day or something. Fine, go take a seat at the benches. I'll give you a nurse's pass if it still hurts after class, or you can just give me a pass now. Nothing. The asshole just looked at her unamused before turning away. Great. Turning, she slowly limped over to the benches before sitting down. Sounds like she was going to be here for a while ... and here she was without her music. Running a hand along her purple hair, she sighed, watching the girls that tripped her before lapped past her again. Her jacks wiggled when she heard what they were whispering to each other. She tried really hard to ignore the harsh words that people would say around her. Never let them get to you, her father would say. Yet after so long they were increasingly hard to ignore. Words about how flat she was or how ugly she was compared to the rest of the school was starting to especially get to her. Heya, Jiru, right. Snapping out of her thoughts, she turned to stare at the little nerdy boy she was thinking about earlier. He was standing at the bottom of the benches, his hand tugging at the sleeve of his gym clothes. The poor boy sounded like he was going to have a heart attack. Yo, Green, what's up? Tilting his head at her like a confused puppy, he silently mouthed the word green with his lips before shaking his head. I saw that you had a pretty hard fall earlier, and I just figured if I should ask if you wanted me to heal you. She blinked. A healing quirk. Those were really uncommon and rare. There was always the option that he was lying to her in order to play a mean trick. Maybe he was sent by the mean clique of girls at school that have it out for her. It wouldn't be the first time. His heart was beating like crazy, so it was almost impossible to tell what part of it was a lie and what part was just him being really bad at talking to girls. But as she stared down at him and his shy little smile, she couldn't help but believe him. Everything she's seen from him hints towards him not having a mean bone in his body. Giving a nod, she spoke. Yeah, sure. That would be great. He nodded back, slowly making his way up the steps. Rubbing his hands together, she could see green sparks flickering off of his hands before they burst into a green flame. Her heartbeat quickened at the sight, tensing as he got closer. Sitting next to her, he placed a hand under her lower calf for support, the comforting touch immediately making her blush. He was being so gentle with her. His other hand hovered over the injury, tracing it slowly. A calming warmth came over her leg as he slid his fingers along her injury, the warmth quickly spreading, making the pain fade away before disappearing completely. It all happened so fast. 1 second she was injured, unable to move her leg, and the next she was fine. Looking down at her knee, it didn't look like she even scraped it to begin with. Meeting his gaze, he gave her a gentle smile, the kind of smile that she couldn't help but feel her heart jump a step. Bowing to her, he turned and went back on his run. As he ran off, she couldn't help but notice that he ran like his right knee was injured, his body slightly jerky as he disappeared from sight. Blushing, she slid a hand down along her newly healed knee. That's certainly something. The sound of the cafeteria was blaring at this hour. Groups of teens came and went, loudly chatting amongst each other, mostly about their days so far. Chewing, spitting, shouting ... It was almost agonizing for her even with her headphones in. Staring down at her food, Jiru stabbed at it with a fork, the sound of her favorite band Deep Dope blasting in her ears in an attempt to silence all of the noise. Lifting some of the food into her mouth, she chewed it with a grimace. Guess this is what I get for forgetting my lunch. Crappy cafeteria food and hurting eardrums. In the corner of her eye, she saw him, smiling a little as she saw a big bush of green hair walk past. She could recognize that hair anywhere. Raising a hand, she waved it in an attempt to get his attention. Yo, Green, over here. He luckily saw her, turning to look towards her with a smile before heading over to where she sat. Plopping a brown bag onto the table, he slung his backpack off before sitting down next to her. Morning, Jiru. Hey, Green, weird of you to be here in the cafeteria. You usually steer clear of this place. Letting out a nervous laugh, he rubbed at his neck. I could say the same about you. You hate it over here. She gave a nod, stabbing at her food again with a fork. She had to give him that ... She does hate it over here. If she could, she'd just take the cafeteria food elsewhere, she would. But the school has a weird rule on leaving with food trays. Something about being low on the amount of trays and not having enough money for more. A rule that was probably made because someone had to ruin it. Mumbling through her food, her eyes looked over the room. I woke up late again and forgot to grab my lunch, so I'm stuck eating cafeteria food. Oh, I'm sorry ... That doesn't sound the best. It's not, but what can you do? Things happen. Shrugging, she looked over to him, watching him open his bag to fish out some sandwiches. She knows she already asked and he deflected the question, but she was feeling nosy today. Why are you here? You usually never come over this way. She wasn't sure at first if he even heard her or that he was just ignoring what she said again, but after taking a bite of his sandwich and chewing slowly, he swallowed, his eyes looking across the cafeteria. His voice was quiet next to her, just enough for her to hear. They found my last hiding spot. Right. Staring down at her food, she stabbed into it again. Less because she wanted to take a bite of the bland-tasting food and more because she just felt like stabbing something right now. Frowning, she watched as some of the grease pooled in the corner of the tray. It had been a few months since Green used his quirk to help her out, and during that time she realized that her and Green were kind of in the same boat. Both weirdos and outcast of the school. They were ignored for the most part. Sure, there were the outliers, like the group of mean girls that constantly looked for ways to mess with her ... or the group of boys that liked to play keep away with Green's backpack. But for the most part it was never physical, just passive-aggressive. That's probably why they've been allowed to get away with it until now. A lot of he said she said nonsense. Popping another bit of food into her mouth, she tilted her head as she chewed. Over the last few months her and Green have become ... well, not exactly friends. Acquaintances perhaps. No, not that either. Maybe more like partners in this hellhole. Better to have one person have your back than no one at all. Looking over to him, he ate in silence. Every once in a while someone would walk by with a physical quirk and his head would snap up, his green eyes sparkling as he watched them. Chuckling softly, she smiled. God, he's such a dork. It had gotten to a point where the surrounding noise had started to get to her. She needed to quiet the sound with a conversation or something. Take her mind off of it. What's your deal anyway? He flinched at the sound of her voice, looking over to her with an embarrassed gaze before looking at the ground, almost ashamed of his actions. I am sorry, I don't mean to stare. I just really like quirks. Not that. You moved here in the middle of the school year. What did you do? Did you hurt someone or something? She of course knew that wasn't the case. There was no way this sweet gentle nerd could be the aggressor. Even though he had gotten slightly taller over the time he's been here, he didn't seem the type. Still, the look he gave her when she asked that was pretty funny, his eyes shooting open like she just asked if he killed his dog. Oh, of course not. He blushed a little at his outburst, looking around the room to make sure no one was staring. Sighing, he stared down at his sandwich, turning it a little in his hand. Did you hear about Aldera? She blinked a few times, the pieces coming together before her eyes. Yeah, I heard about Aldera. My parents said a kid was ostracized by the entire school. The bullying had gotten so bad that his mom found out, and when she did, she hired an investigator to check out the school. Word was that not only did some of the teachers know about the bullying, but they even participated in it. The mother ended up suing them into the ground when she found out. The entire time she was talking, she noticed that Green was shrinking within himself, like a turtle hiding within its shell. Still, she continued on. My mom said a good chunk of teachers were arrested when they found books preaching the word of the Meta Liberation Army. But they were applying the teachings to the children without the parents' consent and even allowing quirk use within the school grounds. Nodding, he closed his eyes. I hadn't heard of that last part, but the rest of it is true. No kidding. So that makes you the kid, huh? A small snort of a laugh escaped his mouth. Yes, that makes me the kid. Letting out a hum, she nodded to herself, the conversation dying down after that. Her jacks wiggled, picking something up in the crowd. Looking up, her eyebrow furrowed when she saw the blonde hair of her bully whispering amongst a group of her friends. They were ... too far away. She couldn't make out what they were saying, but she's sure it wasn't good. What the hell are they planning now? Jiru was so busy trying to hear what her bullies were saying that she was not aware that Midoriya turned to watch her, his gaze flickering to the group and then back to her. It was her turn to jump a little when he spoke. I have been meaning to ask ... why does Chang have such a hate boner for you? She held back a laugh, her eyes not leaving the preppy group of girls. Instead, she snorting a little at the comment. A hate boner, huh? I didn't know you knew what that was. Kendo really likes to say that. He waited for a response from her, being patient like he usually was ... Her jacks wiggled in frustration. She tried to be my friend a long time ago because she heard about my quirk. Offered me a spot in her clique. I don't like the idea of giving people's secrets away, so I turned her down. She didn't take that well, and she has devoted to ruining my life ever since. He blinked a few times at her. That's it. You turned her down and she got mad. I thought there was more bad blood between you two than just that. Rolling her eyes, she leaned back a little. Yeah, well, popular people usually have big egos. In my experience, if things don't go their way, they tend to panic and go in the other direction. There was a pause before Midoriya started to mutter to himself, the noise gradually starting to get louder and faster. Pulling her gaze away from where she was staring, she turned to watch Midoriya. He was looking at the ground in thought, his mouth moving a mile a minute. I never considered ego before. Perhaps if I use that to my advantage, I can finally get in ... He usually leads with his. The muttering got faster and faster until she could no longer understand what he was saying. An uncomfortable feeling ran down her spine as she watched him, a cold, clammy sensation that held on and refused to let go. You will listen to that weirdo. Her head snapped towards the person who said that, a frown tugging at her lip more. She heard another voice from the other side, followed by laughter. God, he's so creepy. I can't believe he's actually sitting with someone. Oh, you don't know. That Kaiuka Jiru. Trust me, she's just as big a creeper as him. Oh, there's someone for everyone, I guess, haha. Her heart rate spiked and her hands clenched. Don't let them get to you. They are just words. I heard that the Midoriya kid keeps weird little journals of people. No way, really. That's probably why he's talking to Jiru, to get more info on people. Closing her eyes, she could feel tears start to form, the conversation spiraling around them as more and more people joined in. The echoed laughter of people could be heard around her, her head lowering as the noise started to build, noise blurring and distorting into a cacophony of sound that started to sound more like white noise than words. A tear ran down her face, her hands shaking. With a sudden slam, the noise in the room died out. All eyes were on her, not even trying to hide the wide-eyed stares. Jiru's shaking hands held the tray of food in her hands. Raising it into the air, she slammed it against the table again. Her food went everywhere, splattering against the ground in brown splotches. Raising it into the air, she brought it down onto the table again. A bizarre sound of plastic on wood filled the air over and over until the tray was a bent, mangled mess. Tossing it aside, she glared up at everyone's startled expressions. Throat raw, she channeled all of her rage and screamed, "Everyone just shut the fuck up and leave me alone." Tossing the tray aside, she stomped out of the cafeteria, kicking a trash can on the way out, a wave of trash spilling out across the stained checkered floor. Midoriya went to go chase after her but hesitated. He was part of the reason she reacted the way she did. It would probably be best if he let her cool off. She was unsure how long she had been running. She just started to run, the frustration of the last few days giving way to so much energy and anger. Why can't she just be normal? Her legs hurt, her lungs burned. Stopping in an alley near the back of the school, she bent down to pant, her fingers digging into her dress uniform in frustration. Fuck. She tried to calm her racing heart, her eyes closing before a fresh wave of anger hit her and she spun around to kick a nearby trash can. A loud metal clanging sound echoing through the empty alley, followed by a sharp pain in her leg. Raising a hand, she punched the concrete wall, the pain in her knuckles feeling like nothing at the moment. She could feel a fresh wave of tears fighting to appear onto her face. Squeezing her eyes closed, she slid a hand down along her hair. Bending her knees, Kyoyuka crouched down, trying to stifle her breathing. I can't believe I just made myself look like an idiot in front of all of those people again. Her jacks wiggled, the sound of footsteps. Getting up quickly, she spun towards the noise, her bleeding fist clenched at her side. She hoped that it wasn't the mean girls who followed her. She's not sure if she could take passive-aggressive comments right now, but another part of her hoped it was them. She could really use something to hit right now that won't mess up her knuckles. Raising her injured fist, her nails dug into her palms, her jacks wiggling to and fro like snakes poised to strike. She imagined the blonde hair of Chang walking around the corner with her lackeys. She imagined grabbing her by the hair and ripping her poorly done hair dye by the roots. She imagined a lot of things. She was so ready to tear a bitch a new hole. But she paused when that's not who she saw. Standing before her was a lithe, lanky girl with her black hair tied into two buns. She looked like her senior, older than her by a year at least. Standing at what had to be 6 foot, she was wearing the same uniform as her, only it was changed, adorned with buttons and ripped at places. She wasn't wearing the tie. Instead, the uniform was opened up, revealing a white tank top underneath. On both wrists, she had black spiked bands that trailed down to long nail-like claws that were painted black. The girl stood out like a sore thumb amongst the other people she's known at school, but the most striking thing was her bright yellow eyes with a slit going through them and smooth black cat-like ears. As she looked the girl over, she remembered hearing a term her dad told her about someone like this once. A yankoi, troublemakers and delinquents that like to skip school and do God knows what in their free time. When the girl spoke, she had a teasing air about her, her voice soft and soothing. Hey, you're Kyoyuka, right? Who wants to know? She fired back a little too fast. The girl giggled, placing a hand on her hip as she walked closer. I do. And you are. You know my name. It's a little rude to not tell me yours. Oh yes. Heaven forbid I be rude. She let out a laugh, walking around Kyoyuka slowly, her yellow eyes shining slightly in the dark alley. The name's Mary Yoshimura. Turning her head only a little, she was sure to not take her eyes off of the girl. The way she slinked around in a circle made Kyoyuka feeling more like prey than anything right now. Well, Yoshimura ... what do you want? She giggled again, raising a hand to her mouth to hide her smile. Now who's being rude? What makes you think I want something? When Kyoyuka didn't respond, she continued on. I saw what you did in the cafeteria today, and dare I say I liked what I saw. You could really kick-ass girl. So I came here to offer you an invitation. That made her raise an eyebrow at her. An invitation? Yes, an offer to join our little group. You don't have to take it right away, of course. Join us for a few hangs out. If we click, you can join us whenever you like. She purred. This was too good to be true. Someone actually wanted to spend time with her that didn't want to use her for something. I don't know. Sounds kind of shady. She laughed. Not my fault you ran right into an alley after freaking out instead of somewhere normal like a school hallway. Turning her back to Kyoyuka as she walked out of the alley, she could see a long black cat's tail sticking out of the back of her dress, slowly swaying side to side. We won't force you, just think on it. Meet us here the same time in a few days if you want to have some fun. The last thing she heard was another giggle before Kyoyuka was left alone yet again. Letting out a shaky breath, Izuku closed his eyes before opening them again, turning to face his opponent of the day. An opponent he has known too well for the last 8 months. Akawa Kazuki stood before him with a smug expression on his face, an expression that told Izuku that he already believed that he had won, even though neither of them have thrown a punch yet. They both took steps forward and met each other in the middle of the ring. The shouts of his classmates can be heard as they made their way past. Kick his ass, Midoriya. Smiling at the sound of Kendo's voice overpowering the others, he could not help but chuckle. She's always so loud. Taking hold of Kazuki's hand as customary, he shook it. A little sportsmanship didn't hurt anybody. Leaning in, Kazuki spoke only loud enough for him to hear. How many times have we done this, Midoriya? Half a dozen at least. And how many times have you won? Midoriya frowned at that. Was Kazuki trying to make him quit? Hesitating for a second, he finally answered sharply. None. That's right. None. He chuckled, flashing him his perfect smile. Let the record show you have not landed a clean hit on me the entire time we have spared. I've been doing this a long time, Midoriya. I know when someone has it ... and when someone doesn't. You clearly don't have it. We'll see about that. I wouldn't count your win just yet. His response startled even him. Not a stutter in sight. Turning, he made his way back to his corner, not noticing Kazuki's shoulders tighten. Limping forward on his cane, Kendo stood between them, slamming the bottom of his cane against the ground to silence the room with a loud crack. Dai waited a second for the noise to die down before speaking. We all know the rules by now. No hitting above the shoulders or below the belt. Only clean hits count. After every clean hit, we come back here to center and reset. First to 3 hits is the winner. Does everyone understand? Midoriya and Kazuki both shouted at the same time like a well-oiled machine, as they were trained to. HAI. Good. Nodding, Dai raised his hand in the air, both of them getting down into their fighting stances. Begin. Chopping his arm down, Dai took some steps back. Getting low with his arms up in a defensive stance, Izuku took in Akawa Kazuki, trying to get a read on any opening. Slowly moving in a circle to not be in a single spot for long. Kazuki had the advantage over him due to his size and weight. He could easily overpower me in a straight-on fight, the memory of the last few sparring matches being a painful reminder of that. He also had more experience than him. With his amount of knowledge, he'll probably stay back and counter whatever I try to throw at him. Almost like he could read Midoriya's mind, Kazuki advanced with a blinding speed, throwing a punch that Midoriya quickly countered, barely having enough time to block a second strike. Ducking under a third, Kazuki did a quick turn, driving his foot into Midoriya's gut, forcing him to skid across the mat. A chorus of oohs could be heard to his left. Or he'll just rush me like a madman. Rubbing at his side, Midoriya frowned at how hard that blow was. Any harder than that and he might have cracked a rib. Point Kazuki. Meeting back to center, he noticed Kazuki give him a cocky smirk. Begin. Kazuki rushed him again with the intent to strike him down quickly, but this time he was ready, taking some steps back to avoid incoming blows. He blocked a fast-moving kick from below. Stepping to the side, Izuku swung an elbow out, barely grazing Kazuki, making him take a step back to avoid the blow. That made him back off for now, allowing Izuku to take some steps back as well in an attempt to gain more space between them. The older boy letting out a frustrated growl that did not go unnoticed by Midoriya. For some reason, Kazuki is being impatient today. I just need to drag the match out. The longer it goes on, the more mistakes he'll make. This time he advanced a little more cautiously, but Izuku could tell that he wanted to be aggressive. He clearly was feeling impatient for a win. Sure enough, he rushed again, feinting with his right arm before lunging forward for a low grab in an attempt to knock him to the ground. Sidestepping that, Izuku did a quick jab to the abdomen, making his body twist from the blow. Point Midoriya. Fuck ya, hi Zuku. He couldn't help but blush at how into this Kendo was ... let alone how she used his first name. That was something he was going to unpack later. Probably. Maybe not. Meeting back to center, Kazuki looked furious. That was the first time he has ever landed a hit on him after all. Hopefully that agitated him enough to make more mistakes. Begin. Sure enough, his opponent let out a furious shout before rushing him. All strategy forgotten in favor of pure brute strength. Raising both of his arms, he brought them down on Izuku's guard with double hammer fist, making his guard crumble. Sidestepping a punch that was clearly aimed for his head, Izuku threw out a kick, forcing him back a step. Izuku kept his advance, throwing out a feint which, in his furious brain, Kazuki fell for, leaving an opening in his defense. A blow to his other shoulder, making him twist before another landed clean on his stomach. Point Midoriya. Smiling, Midoriya let out a small chuckle, unable to stop himself from feel a little happy at his progress. He was doing it. After so long of practicing, so many hours spent alone in the dojo, he was finally getting somewhere in his training. Sure, his opponent was acting a little unhinged and not being his best right now, but he'll take it at this point. Meeting back to center, he could see emotions flicker across the face of his opponent before he took a deep breath, getting down into his fighting stance. Begin. Kazuki advanced again, trying a different strategy this time. A high kick made Izuku duck under his legs, Kazuki pivoting before lunging forward with an elbow, making Izuku jump back. Like a mouse that just fell into the den of a snake, Kazuki kept his advantage, throwing out a quick jab, forcing Izuku to block before taking a step forward, loading his shoulder and following up with a spear jab. Surprised by the strength of the blow, Izuku was forced to lean back, leaving him open for a clear gut punch. A sharp pain rocked his body, making him bend over from the force of the strike. Izuku coughed, his vision shifting for a second. Kazuki is really trying to hurt me, isn't he? Point Kazuki. Turning towards his opponent, Dai looked over Kazuki with a harsh glare. Another hit like that and you are out. This isn't a blood sport. Bristling a little, Kazuki shot back indignantly. What? That move was completely legal. You'll have to be joking me. Has your eyesight gone bad over the years, old man? The argument faded into the background as Izuku gripped the mat, blinking a few times to will the tears away, unable to stop a few drops from hitting the ground next to him. This wasn't the first time he's been hit like this, but he has to admit it's been a while. He thought of the beatings Kaken and his goons used to give him. It was almost nostalgic. Pausing at the thought, he shook his head. There's no way that's a healthy thought process. Looking up, he turned to see Kendo watching on, worried. She looked half tempted to run in. One of the other students was holding her by her tense shoulders in case she tried to start something. Their eyes met and he raised a hand to give her an encouraging thumbs up. It didn't seem to ease her mind at all, but he tried at least. Getting up, he groaned, patting himself off. If you asked Midoriya why he was going to learn martial arts at the beginning, he most likely would have told you for self-defense. He was beat up so much at his old school he needed to learn to defend himself. Being weak was an idea that was drilled into his mind for a long time. When everyone tells you that you are weak, the same way you would say the sky is blue at a certain point, you start to believe them. Now, however, if you asked him why he was learning martial arts, Midoriya would probably give you a different answer. He always dreamed of being a hero, of saving the day with a smile on his face. It was his only dream, really. It's only now, however, did he realize what that truly meant. Dreams are a wonderful thing, but if you don't move towards the dream, then it only stays the same length out of reach. His dream felt so far away that it felt almost impossible, so he didn't even try. Izuku realized that right now the only thing he could do is try. The best he could do was to be better than the day before. Kazuki and Dai had stopped arguing now. Silencing the anxious voices nipping in the back of his mind, he closed his eyes, taking in a deep breath, his bright green eyes flickering open with an extra green shine, a single ember coming from his mouth. Years from now, the people who were at that dojo would say that that was the moment where they watched Izuku Midoriya truly start on his journey. Begin. Rushing forward, Izuku took the offensive. Surprised to see the shy Izuku push so hard, Kazuki swung a wild haymaker. Blocking it with his forearm, Izuku parried it aside before lunging in with a twisting strike. Eyes widening, Kazuki had to duck under the strike, else it hit him right between the eyes, just in time for a second strike to come his way. Blocking the second strike, Kazuki took a step back on the defensive, trying to find an opening as he blocked a few more strikes. This was so foreign for Kazuki, having to fight to survive an assault of punches. Izuku lunged forward with an elbow to the gut, but Kazuki blocked it with both of his arms, exactly what Izuku was waiting for. With intense speed, Izuku reached forward and took hold of the opening in his gi, sliding his leg behind Kazuki's and pivoting to knock him off of his feet. In 1 second, the big teen was on his feet, and only a second later, both of his feet were no longer on the ground. Slamming against the padded floor, Kazuki was forced to stare up at the ceiling, unable to do anything but watch as Izuku raised a fist and hit him clean in the chest. Match point, Midoriya. He did it. He did it. Sitting up, a big grin spread across his face. Hopping to his feet, he raised his fist into the air, only to practically get knocked off of them again when Kendo crashed into him. Pulling him into a bone-cracking hug, she grinned from ear to ear, shaking him a little like a rag doll, almost like she was the one who just won. You did it. I can't believe you pulled it off. That was incredible, Midoriya. You're incredible. Thanks. It was hard to. Words. His face was bright red, his arms hovering in the air because he was unsure where it was okay to touch. She had lifted him into the air, shaking him from side to side. After a few minutes of being unable to pry himself free from her, he accepted his fate, hiding his burning face into her shoulder. Getting up quickly, Kazuki turned towards the two of them, a furious look spreading across his face. He watched as Kendo and the rest of the class congratulated the fucking nerd. He growled, his fingers digging into the mat. This was impossible. There's no way he was just beaten by such a weak little freak. He must have cheated somehow. Midoriya was smiling as Kendo clung to him, singing his praises like he actually fucking did something. Was no one going to stop this? Turning towards the ref, old man Dai was watching them with a small upturn of his lip. Oh, I see now. The freaking nerd had tricked Master Dai as well. He had managed to trick them all. I'll show them who's the real winner here. Getting up quickly, Kazuki lunged at them, gaining ground between them quickly. His eyes wide and snarling like a wild animal, his fist clenched. I'll show you to make a fool out of me. They both still had their backs to him, completely unaware of his presence. Raising a fist, she shifted his weight, putting all of his strength into a fist aimed across the back of the nerd's head. Crack. Sharp pain ran down his arm, his fist being knocked aside by old man Dai. Dipping forward, Dai thrust an open palm into his chest, knocking him back a foot with the force. Skidding across the ground, he placed a hand on his chest with a growl. That was the hardest strike he had, and Dai parried it like it was nothing. Old man Dai did not yield. He didn't even seem fazed, merely looking at him with an unamused look. Sweat ran down his face as he sized up the old man. There was no way he was winning this fight. Stand down, Kazuki. Dai's voice was harsh and sharp, the command immediately zapping him of the rest of his anger. Red-hot anger faded, reminding him of how they weren't the only ones in the room. His eyes looked over the dojo. Everyone was staring at him surprised. Kendo stood before him looking furious, angrier than he has ever seen her. He looked to the girls and hoped that they would come to his aid, yet all they did was give him a disgusted look. No one was going to come to his defense. The energy in the room was high as everyone watched him. Looking over, Kazuki stared at Midoriya. The nerd had the gall to look startled, like he wasn't just caught in the act. Kazuki could swear that he saw the nerd flash him a smug look. Squeezing his fist tighter, he grit his teeth before standing up. Turning and heading for the door, he kicked it open on the way out with a loud slam before disappearing into the cool night air. How dare that nerd make a fool of him? Does he even know who he was? He'll make him pay for this. He'll prove what kind of person the nerd really was ... and then everything will go back to the way it was. He will pay. Somewhere else at the same time, the sun had set, the cool air nipping at Jiru's neck as she walked. Jiru had always liked the night time. It was quiet. The noise of the hustle and bustle of the city had faded into a low hum quietly going off in the distance. It was soothing for her. Letting out a breath, she could see the faint traces of it in the air ... It was becoming fall again. Soon she would be carving pumpkins with her folks and getting mad that Christmas songs were already playing. Smiling at the thought, she looked down an all too familiar alley. She could hear the faint sound of laughter from inside. Digging her hands into her jacket pockets, she anxiously looked behind her, pausing for a second before disappearing down the alley. Staring at the ground as she walked, she dug her shoe into the cement, moving it from side to side. She could hear the laughter getting louder. If this was a trap, she'd most likely know by now. Her jacks wiggled, concentrating to listen farther in on their conversation. Nothing they were saying sounded malicious or mean. Everything they were talking about sounded fairly normal. A part of her hated how long she stood there listening to the group of them talk. It made her feel creepy. Oh, you don't know. That Kaiuka Jiru. Trust me, she's just as big a creeper as him. Frowning at the thought, she huffed, shaking her head a little. Oh well, whatever happens, happens. Walking farther into the alley, she saw the group of girls in the distance. Their leader, her cat ears twitching before she turned to smile at her, leaning back against the stoop she was sitting on. Ah, Kaiuka, welcome. Walking down the street, Kaiuka Jiru was smiling. It was probably the first real smile she's had in a long time. Surrounded by 3 other girls, she rolled her eyes, saying something sarcastic, making the other 3 laugh as they walked down the street. To her right walked a bubbly girl. Even though the girl was a bit on the shorter side, her curves easily made up for her lack in size. Bouncing from side to side, the girl was dressed in the same school uniform, only this one was adorned with bright and colorful buttons. If someone just looked at her for a second, they wouldn't notice anything different with her, but if they stared a little bit longer, they would notice that her short light blue hair was constantly shifting like it was blowing in the wind, even indoors. Hee hee, and then I said, back off, girl, and then popped her one right in the jaw. Doing a quick jab for good measure, she shadow boxed across open air with a big smile on her face. You should have seen her face. Priceless. Don't talk smack if you don't want to get smacked is what I always say. The peppiest of the 3 Morishita, Sango was the daughter of a middle-class family. Child to a family of bakers, Sango wasn't the brightest bulb out there, but she made up for it with her cheery and can-do attitude. Tilting her head, Jiru watched her as she skipped along, punching at the air as she giggled. She didn't always have the right idea, but she was always nice about it. In many ways, she was the living embodiment of she's a little confused, but she has the right spirit. When Jiru first met her, she was a little intimidated with how nice the girl came off. There was no way that someone would be that nice to someone they just met ... Yet apparently that's just how she is. According to Sango herself, she had been judged a lot when she was younger for hitting puberty early. That and being a little on the dimmer side. It used to bother her how everyone just assumed she had things handed to her on a silver platter just because she was pretty. The most handsome boy at school asking her out. Pretty. She got a C on a test that she studied hard for. Pretty. Found a 20 on the ground. Guess the angels are handing out 20s to pretty girls now. She was telling Jiru that until she met the claws, she didn't know how to stand up for herself. She mostly just took whatever punishment the world gave her and smiled through it ... That was something she could really relate to. But just taking stuff, not the smiling thing. Glancing down at Sango's rather massive chest as she skipped along, Jiru felt herself blush before looking away, her gaze shifting to her left. Walking to her left was Tsudashika, a taller woman with tanned skin and bleached blonde hair. She walked with a confident stride, one hand at her side and the other holding a kendo bamboo sword. Her sleeves were rolled up to reveal thick arms littered with scars. Letting out a hearty laugh, Shika shook her head, her 2 blonde high pigtails swaying. People like that are the worst. It's the passive-aggressive shit that bothers me. Like, why pretend to be nice to me just to talk shit behind my back? Just say you don't like me outright. At least then I know where we stand. On the opposite side of things there was Shika. Big, strong, massive. She could probably crush you between her thighs like you were nothing. Not that she would want that or anything. Shaking her head, Jiru sighed. Now was not the time for gay thoughts. Shika came from a more poor background. Being the daughter of a farmer family meant a lot of long nights tending the fields, which would explain the arms. According to her, before she joined the claws, she was afraid to enjoy, quote, girly things. She was not allowed to wear dresses or makeup when she was younger, always labeled as the big brute. Truthfully, Shika was really good at math and enjoyed a good book, which you would not get by looking at her. Watching her thick forearms fight against her tight uniform, Jiru found herself blushing even harder, her head snapping straight ahead as she internally groaned. I am feeling way to buy to be dealing with a hot girl sandwich right now. Walking ahead was the girl she met before, a year older than them and the leader of their little Sukeban group, Mary Yashimura. She was the founder of the Claws, a group of kick-ass girls that were pissed off at society and took no shit from anyone. Walking straight ahead of them, she walked with the poise of a cat, slick, smooth, and regal. As she walked, her hands were clasped behind her back, her right cat ear twitching before speaking in a low, sultry voice. Of course they aren't going to say anything to your face, Suda darling. The last person who did was beat up. Yeah, well, they shouldn't have called me a man. I hate it when they do that. Hoping up, Sango opened her mouth to chime into the conversation before getting interrupted by Jiru. Why are you guys being so nice to me? The three turned back to look at Jiru. Somewhere along the line she had stopped walking, her gaze fixed on the ground as she picked at her sleeve. A frown tugged at her lip as she took a second to continue. You all are so nice and cool. Well, I'm just... She trailed off, the rest of the sentence disappearing into the ground. Flat, weird, ugly, stalker. The three looked amongst each other, not knowing what to say. Jiru could feel the bright yellow eyes of Yashimura upon her, taking in her every flaw and every insecurity. The moment felt like forever as Jiru bared herself to them. It's been a long time since she has been honest to anyone. Showed someone how insecure she really was, letting people see the real her. Jumping in place, she felt long nails dance along her shoulder, looking up to see Yashimura looking down at her. There was no sign of teasing in her voice, because you're like how we used to be. Hated, Judge chirped Sango. Fucking pissed, growled Shika. I used to be feared by my class. Hated for how I came off to people. Caressing her cheek, Yashimura tilted her head up to face her. Lowering a long claw-like finger, she wiped at a tear running down Jiru's cheek. She wasn't even aware that she was crying until now. Eventually, I realized that it didn't matter what they thought about me, only what I thought of me. So I made the claws and promised myself I would never just sit back and take what they were saying about me lying down. They want to hate me. Fine, I'll show them something to be hated. Hopping up next to her, Sango smiled big at her. We don't care what they say about you. But what about my quirk? Looking from side to side, she wasn't sure why she was fighting this so much. She should feel happy that a group of girls were accepting her. Aren't you worried I'll find out your secrets? Purring, Yashimura shook her head with a smirk. Rule number 1 of the claws is no secrets. If you want to know something, just ask. Besides, there's no point in worrying about quirks, said Shika next to her with a frown, gesturing to each of them with her thumb. Sango can make a light breeze. Yashimura can see in the dark, and I can make my hair grow longer. You don't need a quirk to be a badass bitch. We like you for you, Kaio, Sango said, smiling. These three were way too close for her liking. Blushing deeply, she was pulled into a group hug, sandwiched between the three of them. Kaio. She squeaked out, her face bright red. She had never had a nickname before. The three laughed to her dismay, hiding her face in her hands. Letting out another purr, Yashimura spoke near her ear, making her jump. Not that I don't hate bonding time as much as the next, but what say we go have some fun? The three of them cheered as they pulled away from the hug, leaving Jiru a nervous, blushing mess. Watching the three of them walk away, she sighed, slapping both palms against her cheeks before chasing after them. Hanging out with three super cool girls. I'm not going to survive the night. Walking up the hill slowly, Izuku took a bite of his cold ice pop, his head turning to stare at the skyline as he walked. The sun had barely started to set, the sky starting to turn from a nice blue to a beautiful mix of pinks and purple. Shifting on his shoulders, he could feel Yuki kicking her small feet to and fro as she ate at her own ice cream, letting out a happy little hum as she took a bite of some kind of fudge pop. Walking next to him and holding his hand was her twin brother Sora, his bright teal eyes turning to stare at some pumpkins as they walked past, the wooden stick of his ice cream popping out of the corner of his mouth as he stared with childlike wonder. The look couldn't help but make Izuku smile. He remembers that look all too well. Turning, he looked at the same lit pumpkins sitting on the doorstep. It was going to be Halloween soon. Another month has gone by since he had met the Kendos. The saying really is true. Time sure does fly by when you're having fun. Walking a little farther ahead, Izuku turned to face him, popping her own frozen treat out of her mouth to speak. You should have seen it, Yuki. Midoriya was like Midoriya punch. Punching her fist forward like she was imitating him, she let out a laugh. Kazuki had no idea what hit him. Giggling, Yuki sitting on his shoulders threw her tiny fist out, imitating her older sister. Yeah, Zuzu punch. Blushing as Izuku was telling this story again, he couldn't help but squirm under the praise the two sisters kept throwing at him. He didn't deserve all of the praise they gave him, and a part of him hoped they would just let it go. At least then he wouldn't have to think about that day about a month ago when he actually beat Kazuki. Ever since then the boy has been absent at the dojo, no one seeing hide nor hair of him. Izuku didn't seem to care all that much, saying that he always creeped her out, but Izuku could tell the others at the dojo were a little bummed out. Showboaty and cocky at times, sure, but Kazuki at least inspired the rest of them to do better. But now there was a weird hole where he used to be that no one was able to fill. Everyone seemed to lack motivation now that the main competition was gone. A tiny hand squeezed his, snapping him out of his thoughts. Looking down at Sora as they walked along, the little boy was staring up at him with his big teal eyes, his short orange hair shifting. It took a second for the boy to speak. Mido. Are you going to take me and Yuki trick or treating this year? Nodding, he gave him a gentle smile. Of course, Sora, I'd love to but you know Kendo usually takes you. Why yeah, but she's not as as cool. An offended gasp could be heard ahead of them. Looking up, he saw Izuku facing them with her hands on her hips, looking like she was just stabbed through the heart. Her ice pop slowly slid off of the stick as she stared. Not as cool. Need I remind you that Midoriya is a nerd? I can't believe this. My own little brother. Saying the boy with an All Might shrine is cooler than me. Staring at her, he couldn't help but feel a little offended. It was clearly bait, but he couldn't help himself. It's not a shrine. It's a shrine. All you need are some candles, a lock of his hair, and it'd be a shrine. It's a healthy level of fan merch. Giving him a teasing smirk, she waved her ice pop around, some of it falling to the ground. It's borderline stalking at this point. Honestly, I'm starting to get worried. Opening his mouth to defend his completely normal fan merch, Sora tugged his hand, making him look down at him again. Are you guys gonna kiss now? He said sweetly, staring up at them before putting a thumb into his mouth. A pause. It took them a second before both of their eyes snapped open, faces turning bright red. Turning to the little boy, both Izuku and Kendo started to talk at the same time, their voices going up an octave. What? And no, we're just, me and the nerd. Like that would. Letting out a heavy sigh, Izuku tried to will her racing heart down. Rubbing at her beet red face, she groaned before crouching down to his level. Why would you say that? Who gave you that crazy idea? All he did was stare up at his sister, confused. Sora tilting his head a little. Mom and Auntie and Co told me to not get in the way if it happens. I was just making sure I wasn't getting in the way. Looking at her brother and back to Izuku, the older Kendo sister frowned before letting out a sigh, raising a hand to pinch at the bridge of her nose. Of course they said that. Look, just head inside. Not a word of this to anyone or else I'll tell Mom you had ice cream before dinner. Gasping at her, Sora put his tiny hands to his mouth, quickly turning and scampering inside the house. The shrill voice of his screams could be heard disappearing farther inside. Mom, Izuku just threatened me. The sounds of shouting faded, leaving Izuku, Itsuka, and Yuki alone. Staring at each other, the best friends blushed before looking away. Yuki watching them with a frown, looking between them before her cheeks puffed out. Just like that the mood was ruined. Yuki leaning in and tugging at Izuku's fluffy green hair. Mine. That seemed to have snapped them out of their weird staring contest. Both of them laughing before turning to head inside. Giving him a playful punch on the arm, Itsuka walked inside first, her hand rubbing at her neck awkwardly as she turned the corner. Setting Yuki down, he took his bright red shoes off, setting them into a pile of others before making a trek down the entrance hall. Yuki held onto his sleeve as he followed the sound of chaos he has grown used to by now. Opening the sliding doors, he jumped back a little as Eri ran past them with a smug look on his face, followed by a very angry Aka and only a towel. A few seconds later, she was screaming profanities the entire time after him. Looking over the room, he noticed the elder Dai was sitting in his normal rocking chair, watching some black and white movie. Kota and Matsuo were drinking alcohol and laughing while Hata, Ren, and his mom were chatting as they made dinner. Hata seemed to be chatting with Itsuka over something, most likely scolding her. Walking across the living room with Yuki, they made their way over to the group of girls. Why is your brother saying you threatened him? Asked Hata in a motherly tone, her eyebrows slightly raised. Who knows with him? You and I both know Sora likes to make stuff up a lot. Sure. Standing next to his mom, they both watched the back and forth between mother and child for a few seconds in silence, not really knowing what to say. Their dynamic was so different from their own. Looking over at his mom, she was smiling gently at the display, her hands absently rubbing at a towel as she watched. It's kind of funny. Ever since that dinner at the Kendo home all those months ago, the Kendo family invited his mother into their home with open arms. His mother tried to fight it at first, but as Izuku has learned over his time with them, saying no to a Kendo was impossible. Soon his mother and co was joining them for every dinner. Sometimes he even just finds her hanging out with the Kendo family the same way that he and Itsuka spent time together. He remembers once reading the phrase introverts don't make friends. They just get adopted by extroverts. Perhaps this is what that meant. Watching her a little longer, he smiled. His mother raised a hand to her mouth to hide her giggle at something one of them said, her eyes closing as she smiled more genuinely. Her cheeks were lightly painted red from smiling so hard. His mother was so much happier now. Wrapping an arm around her, he pulled her in for a side hug. She jumped a little in surprise in his grip but didn't pull away, simply looked up at him confused. She seemed to be trying to read him for a second before smiling, nestling into his shoulder. Leaning down, he kissed the top of her head, the chaos of the Kendo family falling away around them. This was nice. Sitting on the ground, Izuku let out a groan, a hand lowering to rub at his stomach as he stared up at the ceiling. A part of him wanted to get up and try to burn all of these extra calories, but another part of him wanted to just lay there and die. He had eaten way too much food. The ceiling fan slowly spun in place, almost mocking him in its motion. Turning his head, he watched as Kendo sat on her bed, her head in between 2 pages of some motorcycle magazine as she read it quietly to herself. How she was perfectly fine after that massive meal that their mothers made was beyond him. Yet another mystery about Itsuka Kendo that he will probably never find out the answer to. Sitting up, he felt a sleeping Yuki shift against his chest, letting out a small whimper. Lowering a hand, he gently tousled her hair, making her smile a little in her sleep. She's like your kid or something. Turning, he noticed that Kendo was no longer reading her magazine. It's sitting next to her as she watched them. Letting out a small laugh, he shook his head before looking down at Yuki again. You don't even joke about something like that. If my mom hears that, I'll never hear the end of it. Why, you know how much she wants more kids. God, my mom's the same. Always pestering about when I'm going to get married and start a family of my own. I personally can't see it. Any reality where you aren't kicking butt isn't our reality I want to be in. Letting out a small huff, she blew a stray hair out of her face. You mean any reality where we aren't kicking butt, right? That made him pause, his raised hand flinching in the air. How could a simple word mean so much? It was amazing how much confidence she had in him sometimes, but give up already, Deku. You're as weak as they come. Not in a million years could you beat me. In what world do you think you will ever be my equal? Staring at the ground, he let out a dry chuckle, devoid of all humor. Why, you have C course. Oh, once you get into UA and I into M medical school, we're going to kick Major B butt. They went back into silence again, only this one had a weird tension in the air that you could probably cut with a knife. Kendo was staring at him for a good minute, not knowing what to say. He silently chastised himself for ruining their good mood and being a downer again. Why couldn't he just be happy with what he has? What good is it reaching for impossible dreams? He could feel Kendo's teal eyes on him, looking him over slowly. He had no idea what she was thinking, but the small tug at her lip into a frown told him it probably wasn't anything good. She looked like she was trying to say something, her mouth opening before closing again in thought. In a snap, the silence was broken by the sound of his mother's voice calling out to him, making both of them jerk a little at the sound. Izuku, can you come down here for a second? Sitting up, he quickly looked away from her, unable to stand the look she was giving him. It was probably best to just leave the room for now. Gently picking Yuki up, he sat her down on a pillow, her tiny hand refusing to let him go for a second but eventually giving in. Putting on the best smile he could, he stood up before leaving the room. Kendo reached for him, her hand hovering in the air before slowly lowering with a sigh, leaving her to the quiet of the room. Heading out of the room, Izuku paused at the closed door. Leaning against the door, he groaned, a hand rubbing at his face in annoyance before letting out a tired sigh. Putting on the best smile he could, he made a left down the hall, walking down a few flights of stairs, making sure not to step on Kojo, an old man of a bloodhound that belonged to the Kendos who was sleeping on a step of the stairs. He made his way into the living room. Peeking into the room, everyone seemed to be knocked out or have gone to bed already. Everyone except his mom, Itsuka's mom, and aunt. They were sitting at a round table giggling and laughing amongst each other when he arrived, his mom turning to smile with a goofy look on her face from her spot at the table. She was clearly enjoying alcohol with her friends. She didn't look wasted per se, but definitely tipsy. Ah, there he is. Izuku, can you do me a favor and fetch me the gift I brought for the Kendos? I meant to go get it earlier but got lost in the chaos of making dinner. Smiling softly, he gave a small nod, turning to head for the front door. Sure thing, Mom. I'll be right back. Sliding the big double door open, a low rusted scrapping filled the night air, his arm flexing under the strain. Stumbling out into the cool night, he sighed, the only light coming from inside the house. Heading down the rocky pathway, his feet crunched under the grass lining the two sides as he made his way over to his mom's parked car. Walking next to it, he slid his fingers along the old metal of the clunky thing that his mother bought after they moved. The poor thing was most likely ready for another touch-up by Izuku and her uncle. Frowning at the thought of Izuku again, he sighed, his breath barely visible in the night air. Izuku was so busy standing there and thought he hardly noticed the sound of rapid footsteps before it was too late. Jumping back, a metal bat collided against the side of his mom's car, a solid clang echoing through the silent air. A man stood with a mask over his face, baseball bat in both of his hands as it hit right where he was just standing. Slowly, the masked man turned towards him, his furious eyes peeking out from behind the plastic Halloween mask. Looking over to where Izuku dodged, the man turned towards him, baseball bat posed to strike. Though, this was bad. Ducking under a wide swing of the bat, he raised his arms just in time to block a second strike. A stinging sensation ran up his arm from where metal hit forearm. Taking a step back, Izuku kept trying to put distance between him and the assailant to no prevail, the man advancing every time Izuku took steps back. The sharp pain of metal hit his back, his knees buckling for a second before gritting through it. Ducking another wide swing, he grabbed onto the man's arm, twisting his wrist until he lost grip of the bat, slamming an elbow into the man's side. Tossing the weapon behind him, he panted, slightly injured, successfully unarming the man. Bat or not, the man did not seem to care. Rushing forward, the masked man lunged out with a fist, taking Izuku off guard. Blocking it, the man continued his rage-filled assault. Throwing out a wild haymaker, Izuku took his arm, pivoting his waist, and tossed the man onto the ground with a loud thud. Clattering to the ground, the man's mask fell off. Izuku was so ready to continue the advance, but he paused when he got a good look at the man. He stared at the man on the ground, the man furiously flailing around before getting back onto his feet. Kazuki. Sure enough, Akawa Kazuki stood before him, a little worn for wear but overall okay. He looked tired, heavy bags lining under his eyes. Swallowing, he attempted to speak. Kazuki W. What? Why are you? Don't give me that pathetic nerd act you always pull. I've already figured you out. This is all of your fault. Pointing a finger at him, he spat onto the ground. Some blood trickled from the side of Kazuki's mouth as he laid a hand at his side from where he was elbowed. Everything was perfect until you came along. Now everyone hates me. Taking a step towards him, Izuku took a step back. I don't know what. Izuku muttered. Doing an imitation of him, Kazuki growled, walking closer. Cut the bullshit. Do you have any idea how hard I've worked to get where I am? How many tournaments I had to win? Raising his hands up, Izuku Midoriya shook his head. I didn't. I just wanted to get us stronger. That seemed to have made Kazuki pause. Owlishly looking at him, he blinked a few times, the confusion on his face quickly turning to anger. I'll show you strength. Lunging forward, he did a high kick which Izuku ducked under. Spinning, he went to do a second kick, Izuku lunging forward and doing a double palm to his chest. Skidding back, Kazuki slid against the ground before growling, a hand rubbing at his stomach. Not bad. You've gotten even better since last we fought. I have a feeling I'd have a hard time fighting you in a dojo. Placing a hand down along a concrete wall next to him, Izuku watched as the concrete crept up his arm, slowly spreading to cover his entire body. Standing up, he slammed his concrete fist together with a wicked grin. But this is the real world, and in the real world I can do this. Jumping back, he barely dodged a double fist slam by Kazuki, the ground cracking under the force of the blow. Rolling back, Izuku had to flinch from the force, looking at Kazuki and then back to where he was just standing. So that's his quirk. He can absorb materials and cover himself in a type of armor. I wonder what the limits to it are. Can he do it to water? Fire? That could be really useful with. Jumping back from another strike, Izuku ducked under a wild haymaker, shaking his head forcefully. This isn't the time for this. Finding a clear opening, Izuku rushed in, raising a fist. With all of his strength, he drove his fist forward, striking right in between Kazuki's ribs. Pain shot through his arm, a sharp crack filling the air. Kazuki cocked back a fist, striking him hard in the stomach, knocking him back against the ground. Letting out a laugh, Kazuki smiled down at him, walking closer as he spoke. Pathetic. Is that really the best you could do in a real fight? The entire time he was talking, Izuku was staring at his hand, his fingers red and bent in a way that he was pretty sure they weren't supposed to bend. Flexing his hand, he flinched under the pain. I just broke my fingers trying to hit him. Kazuki's shoe slammed down against his injured hand, crunching under the heel of his foot. He ignored Izuku's pain screams as he raised his foot and stepped on his hand over and over. Not so tough now that you don't have Izuku or the old man protecting you, aren't you? This is what the real world is like. Taking his foot off of Izuku's hand, he reached down, pulling Izuku onto his feet by his hair before driving a concrete fist into his stomach, making him fall to his knees again. The world warped around Izuku, pain rocking his body. Getting hit with a concrete fist hurt a whole lot more than a normal one. I was supposed to be the one that pulls this no-name dojo out of obscurity. Not you. Kazuki looked him over all while Izuku was staring down at the ground in pain. Taking hold of Izuku's chin, he forced him to look up at him, turning his head from side to side. I don't get what the kendos see in you. Just a scrawny little punk that got lucky a few too many times. Humming and thought he smirked. Maybe you're like a little stray that they found. A pathetic little pup that they can nurse back to health and pat themselves on the back after. A charity case perhaps. Blinking a few times, Izuku felt tears start to appear in his eyes. Closing his eyes, he tried to will them down to no prevail. Red-hot shame running down his face. It was all true, wasn't it? He always wondered why he was so lucky to meet the Kendos. Why they allowed him into their home and watched over him the way they did. It all made sense now. They felt bad for him. Hey! An equally furious shout rocked the air. Turning, they both stared. Standing in the doorway of the Kendo home, a woman stood in shining light. The light shining from behind, making her look like a guardian angel, glowing with an angelic shine. Drop. The nerd. Itsuka Kendo had now entered the fray and she looked pissed. Sitting in a low-dimmed room, Kyokajiru sat between two girls much taller than her. Mood lighting shifting along the floor, illumined by a cheesy disco ball hanging from the ceiling. The rhythm of an upbeat song blared from the speakers as Sango danced around on stage like she was some wannabe pop idol. Doing a little twirl, she spun, raising a microphone to her lips to belt out the last few lines. Her singing honestly wasn't the best Jiru had ever heard. She didn't hit every note just right and her voice wasn't the strongest out there, but she made up for it in confidence. Sango thought she sounded amazing and she was having fun, which meant they were having fun too. Shika sat to her right, her big frame pressed against Jiru's side, smiling as she clapped at the end of the song. Letting out a throaty chuckle, she got up to take the mic from her friend, leaving Jiru alone with Yoshimura again. Yoshimura sat with her legs crossed, her sharp eyes taking everything in before smiling back at her. You're thinking too loud again, Kyle. She couldn't help but flinch a little being called out. Looking over, she watched Sango and Shika chatting amongst each other. They looked like they were having fun. Sorry, I'm just a little surprised. When you guys were talking about something fun, I just assumed, she muttered, her voice losing steam, that we were going to drag you into a gang fight or something. Kinda. She laughed, gently patting her knee. Well, yes, we do sometimes get into gang scuffles now and again. We mostly stick to ourselves. The claws don't care much for power, only strength enough to be ourselves. Nothing more. Oh, sorry for assuming. It's all right. Most people assume the worst of us. Looking at her friends, Yoshimura gave a genuine smile. We stick out for our own, Kyle. If you decide to join us, that means you as well. We can talk about this more later, but it looks like it's your time to sing. Blinking a few times, Jiru almost jumped out of her skin when Sango and Shika jumped her, thrusting the microphone into her hands before nudging her onto the little stage they had. Stumbling onto the stage, she threw her hands out, whimpering a little as she turned to face them. All right, I'm going. You don't have to push me on stage. Turning to face them, she couldn't help but feel her anxieties skyrocket. The catcalls and whistles that the others were giving her were not helping in the slightest. Fidgeting in place, she turned towards the old karaoke machine, scrolling through it with her thumb for a minute before pausing on a song. Blinking, she stared at the neon light of the monitor, her eyes going over the name of the song multiple times. I can't believe they actually have this song. She thought of her family, an old memory of her walking downstairs in the middle of the night, gently rubbing a tiny hand against her tired eyes as she followed the sound to the kitchen before peeking inside. She thought of the sight of her mom and dad singing quietly to this song as they danced together, slowly swaying side to side in a gentle, soothing rhythm. She had almost forgotten of that memory. Pressing some buttons on the monitor, she turned towards them, towards their expecting eyes. Swallowing all of her self-doubt and all of her fears, she closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and she started to sing. Standing across each other, Itsuka and Kazuki stared each other down, neither of them wanting to make the first move. Why are you here, Itsuka? Growled Kazuki. Gesturing with her thumb towards Midoriya slumped against the wall, she responded just as evenly. Midoriya was taking too long. Thought I should check on him. That's just like you to baby him. I'm glad I did, else you would have just beat on him. Do you enjoy beating up people smaller than you, Kazuki? Looking over at Midoriya, she frowned before looking back at him, cracking her knuckles. You mean showing him his place? I know what I said. Kazuki was the first to move, dashing forward and opening with a few punches. Kendo blocked them, each blow leaving a stinging pain in her arms. Ducking over a kick, her fist went cocked to her side before jamming forward, her fist growing mid-punch to knock Kazuki back, the concrete over his stomach cracking. Before he could respond, Kendo went on the offensive, her hand growing massive before completing wrapping around Kazuki's frame. You just be a good psycho and sit tight until my parents call the cops. Sharp pain pierced her hand, concrete spikes hitting her big hand in all directions. Letting out a yelp, she let him go, Kazuki's concrete armor shifting before turning back to normal. Rushing forward, Kazuki's arm sharpened into a blade before thrusting at her face. Dodging to the left, the blade sliced open Kendo's cheek, her large hand raising into the air and slamming down against the ground to make a shockwave. They were back to square one, staring at each other again. Kazuki held his hurt side while drops of blood trickled from Kendo's cheek and hand. Sitting up from his spot on the ground, Izuku absently placed his broken hand against the wall, squinted against the pain. Looking forward, he was unable to look away from the fight. Someday I'll find my way home. Kazuki ran forward, slashing at Kendo's arm a few times. She retaliated by knocking him aside with a big hand backhand. His body ragdolling against the ground before turning into a roll, forcing himself to his feet and running at her again. The trees and the wind will lead the way. Izuku slowly stood to his feet, his teeth gritting in pain. Kazuki ducked under a big punch. Spinning, he tried to cut at her leg only to be knocked away again. All of these years on my own ... They flew right by, so what can you say? Pulling two big hands back, Kendo slammed them together, creating a shockwave that slammed into Kazuki, chunks of his concrete armor getting knocked away. There's no need to be sad. You're on a path and you know where it heads. Jumping into the air, Kendo tried to pin Kazuki down only for him to dodge out of the way, his blade arm stabbing into her enlarged hand. There's no need for despair. Just walk on and you'll find your way there. Letting out a pained yell, Kendo instinctively pulled her hand back, leaving an opening for Kazuki to rush in, his blade arm poised to stab at her stomach. Someday I'll find my way home. Eyes widening, Izuku rushed in, the pain in his body forgotten, adrenaline pumping through his body. Rushing forward, he went to go intercept, his body getting in between Kendo and the blade. Someday I'll find my way home. Pushing all of his body into it, he thrust his shoulder, football tackling Kazuki to the side, his smaller frame unable to completely move him but succeeding in knocking him off balance. Reeling a hand back, Kendo's fist grew as big as it could, the shadow slightly overcasting over them. Someday I'll find my way home. Bringing the massive fist down, it cleanly hit Kazuki right across the face, his body rolling and tumbling backwards before colliding with the wall behind him with a loud thud, the rest of his concrete armor shattering off of his unconscious body. It was quiet again, the only sound being Izuku and Kendo's ragged and tired panting. Kazuki did not move, his body slumped against the wall, drool dripping out of his mouth, but only for a second before the sounds of sirens could be heard. Itsuka's mom and Inko had called the cops as soon as they heard the commotion. Looks like they just now have arrived. Kendo looked towards him, her body bruised and injured. Blood flowed down her cheek as she looked over at Izuku's just as injured body. He was holding his reddened and broken hand. Opening her mouth, she closed it before opening it again. Red and blue light starting to appear in view in the horizon. Come with me to UA, she rasped out, her throat raw and ragged. What? Looking back at her, he did a double take in an attempt to make sure he heard her right. The UA entrance exam is in 2 years. Come with me. Hobbling closer, she reached a hand out, it slowly closing into a fist. We may not be amazing now, but together ... You and I can become the best heroes this world had ever seen. Giving him a shaky smile, she reached the fist towards him. What do you say? Rivals? He stared at her, speechless. His mouth was dry, his hand broken, and pain coursed through his body every time he shifted his weight. But looking at her right now, illuminated in a blinking red and blue light that was quickly getting closer, he thought of All Might, the feeling he got when he first saw the video of him pulling a man out of a wreckage. He swallowed, returned the smile, and reached forward, taping his fist against hers. Yeah, rivals. Smiling at each other, they paused before both proceeding to scream for tapping their injured fists together. The karaoke room was quiet after she finished singing. Opening her eyes, she turned towards the claws. She was so into the song that she only now realized that no one said anything after she started singing. All three of them sat there in silence, their eyes wide like saucers. Oh God, they hated it. Did she do something wrong? Why is no one saying anything? Raising a hand, she coughed into her hand. All three of them snapping out of whatever trance they were in. Are you guys oh? Sango ran forward and knocked her to the ground with a big hug, tears leaking from her face. That was beautiful, Kaio. What? She muttered, her face bright red. She watched in horror as Shika ran towards her, wrapping a thick arm over her shoulder. Damn girl, talk about leaving the best for last. Why didn't you say you could sing sooner? That's... Yashimura slowly walked over, a claw hand swiping a single tear from her eye. Yes, that was quite beautiful, Kaio. I am impressed. She sputtered like a broken car, her face turning redder. Why, you guys actually liked it? Liked it. We loved it, cheered Sango. I feel like I should have paid for a show like that. Feels weird to get it for free, smirked Shika. I agree. You are very talented, Kaio. Her face was bright red. Blinking a few times, she could feel tears start to form. Only these tears were tears of joy. Giggling, she sniffled before it turned into full laughter. Her heart felt so full right now, it almost felt wrong to feel this good. Breaking from the group, she wiped at her flowing tears with her forearm, unable to stop herself from smiling. Turning away, she giggled again. Was this what it was like to have friends? This is amazing. I feel like I finally found my people. Just wait until I tell Midoriya. You guys could meet in. Turning, Jiru paused, a cold shiver running up her spine at the sight. All of the claws were staring at her. Midoriya, you mean the muttering kid? Tilting her head, Sango frowned. You're friends with the creepy note keeper? I thought he just sat with you at lunch that one time. Shika's thick arms crossed. I wouldn't exactly say friends. Looping around, Yashimura looked her over before speaking. I think you misunderstand Kaio. This invitation to the claws is for you and you only. Besides, you don't need him anymore when you have us. Her heart rate quickened. Her hands felt clammy. Looking over the three of them, her mouth opened slightly. What? Falling back against the ground, Kazuki met the cold, harsh reality of his concrete cell. The world was spinning, his head throbbing. The sound of cell bars slammed behind him, barely registering in his barely awake days. Laying against the ground, he could feel his eyes getting heavy again, slowly sliding closed before snapping wide just to slowly close against. He tried to fight against it, but every effort to stay awake ended in naught. Was this because of a quirk or because he had a concussion? A silent low hum was his only answer, his eyes drifting closed before finding sleep again once again. He was unsure how long he's been here. There was no light in the cell and the hours blurred together until they became unnoticeable. Every once in a while someone would come and give him some food that he mostly ignored. Sitting against the wall, he spat a small amount of blood against the ground. Sliding a tongue along his mouth, he could feel a tooth slightly move every time he touched it. He was probably going to have it removed when he gets out of here. Looking up, he squinted against the single light shining from the ceiling. Clattering before him was another plate of barely edible soup. Looking up, he caught the sight of a cop turning and walking back down the hall. Almost on Quay, his stomach rumbled, a hand lowering to rub at it. Fuck. Leaning forward, he grabbed at the plate, a leg propping up to keep his wobbly body steady. His mind was still a little hazy from everything. He remembers buying a Halloween mask, confronting the nerd and overpowering him with his sheer might. The memory of Midoriya's pained screams brought a small smirk to his face before he paused. What happened after that? Suddenly, in a flash, he remembers a massive fist flying straight for him. Squinting, he pressed his hand against the stinging sensation in the back of his head, his fingers sliding along a handful of wrapped bandages. I remember now. I was beaten. They cheated. It took both of them to beat me. Taking a bite of his food, he almost gagged, tossing the plate against the ground again. Raising an arm, he slammed the bottom of his fist against the wall behind him, standing up slowly on shaky legs. That fucking nerd and his pet bitch. His harsh voice echoed through the room, gradually getting louder before turning into a shout. Do these people not know who the hell I am? I'm Okawa Kazuki, child fucking prodigy. Getting up quickly, he rushed at the cell doors, slamming against the cell with a furious shout. Fingers met cold steel, his fist clenching into fist as he shook at the bars. Do you people have any idea how many competitions I've won? I've done more than any of you in your whole lives. Just you wait until my dad finds out about this. You people will be living on the streets. The sound of a door opening snapped him out of his rage-filled tirade. Light peeked from down the hall as the sound of clicking got closer. It took him a second to realize that it was the sound of high heels. Rounding the corner walked a woman he had never seen before. She had long, pale lilac hair parted to one side and light blue skin. Looking over to him, she smiled, her weird green eyes having a light shine to them. Pitch darkness around the eye where there was usually white. She was the first to break the silence. Hello, Mr. Kazuki. A wave of unease came over him, running down his spine slowly. She knew who he was. Who the hell are you? Another cop come to question me. Walking closer, she rolled her bizarre eyes at him, her voice a silky smooth tone. Not exactly. I'm a reporter. I've come to ask you a few questions. A frown tugged at his lip, letting out another huff. Oh great, a leech. Why the hell would I talk to you? You'll probably just twist my words, making me out to be some kind of monster. On the contrary, my benefactor is quite interested in your story. He's willing to pay for your bail depending on your answers. He didn't expect that. What kind of reporter pays for someone in jail to walk free just for a few questions? And if I answer them wrong? She giggled, a hand moving to her lips. Oh, trust me, I'm a pretty good judge of character. You want? Before he could respond, he watched the woman turn towards the blinking camera hanging in the corner of the room. A red blinking recording light blinked a few times on it before going out. Turning back to him, she raising a hand and making an L with her index finger and thumb, placed the thumb against her forehead. Smiling, the smile turned a little more aggressive. We would love to hear from you, Mr. Kazuki. He froze, his eyes widening at the display before slowly smiling back. Well, of course. Why didn't you say so? I would love to answer a few questions. A dull low hum radiated from the otherwise quiet karaoke machine as Jiru stared at her three new friends. Looking between them, her eyes snapped from one to another, trying to get a read on them. What the hell was this? Some kind of joke? None of them were smiling. She was half expecting them to shout gotcha and start laughing. What do you mean? I can't have both of you as friends? Or are you saying that I can't have other friends if I hang out with you guys? Her voice felt raw, and she had a feeling it wasn't from the singing. Shaking her head, Sango ran over to her quickly, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. No, of course not. That's not what we're saying. Gee, then what are you guys saying? Walking over slowly, Shika frowned. We don't have anything against Midoriya. If you say he's cool, then that's good enough for me, but Yashimura butt in, a hand going to her hip. He's weak. Something about that irked her. Opening her mouth to defend him, Yashimura continued. We're a gang, Kaio. A gang about fighting for our freedom to do as we please. We try to be more on the peaceful side of things, but sometimes peace doesn't work. Looking her over, Jiru could see sadness in her eyes. She truly looked sorry for what she had to say. I'm sure Midoriya is a great kid ... but if we are seen spending time with him, it makes us look weak by proximity. Weakness invites only trouble. Then why offer me an invitation? I'm one of the weakest people in gym. Looking at her, she watched Yashimura's cat ear twitch. Because we see ourselves in you, Kaio. Do you honestly see Midoriya hanging out with a bunch of punk chicks? We would eat him alive. Clenching her hands, Jiru felt nauseous. Was that really it? Nothing evil or cruel, just a clash in style. A nerd hanging out with a bunch of punks is bad for their image. That somehow made her feel worse. If it were something evil, she could at least stand up to them. But this, there really was no way for her to have them both. Was there? She had to choose. That's... Yashimura continued her assault. I take it you and Midoriya are close. Spend a lot of time together. Opening her mouth to respond, she paused. And no ... we've never hung out after school before. Then I take it you have a lot in common. Staring at the ground, she frowned more. And no, we've never really talked about likes. You must know a lot about him then. Really click. He goes to a dojo after school and has an all-night lunchbox sometimes. She weakly answered, desperately reaching for straws. Yashimura paused before huffing. Then what is the problem, Kaio? It doesn't even sound like you guys are friends. What was the problem again? Her and Midoriya never really clicked. They never really had anything in common before. They just stuck up for each other when no one else would. If she starts to hang out with the claws, she wouldn't need Midoriya to stick up for her anymore. Despite all of that, the thought of just up and leaving Midoriya behind made her feel horrible. Maybe it was because she was usually the one being left behind. A memory of a bright-faced Midoriya laughing at something she said crossed her mind. The genuine smile crossing his face as he looked over at her. Him smiling down at her. Fire dancing along his fingers like a dance as he caressed her injured knee. The way his green eyes shined. An ember of fire moving along his eyes. Another of him sweaty and panting as he desperately ran past her on the track. Constantly pushing to get better. Of her pushing herself to try and keep up with him but unable to. His back constantly out of reach. Something twisted inside of her. An uncomfortable heat hitting her stomach. Regardless of what the others said, she knew the truth. Midoriya was strong. Stronger than all of them combined ... and he was getting stronger every day. He wore a lot of baggy clothes, but she saw it. She'd have to be crazy not to recognize his growing muscle and how he gradually was getting taller. Panting, she bent over, sweat rolling down her face as Midoriya got farther and farther away. She tried to call after him, but he was too far, disappearing over the horizon. How long until he no longer needs her anymore? How long until she's all alone again? He would be fine on his own. Right, he didn't really need her. But she knew deep down she really needed the claws. She had been alone for so long ... she couldn't just give up the one group of people that get her. Taking a deep breath, she slowly nodded her head. She knew what she had to do. Green eyes tiredly opened, slowly looking over the living room. Turning, he stared at the TV facing him from across the way. A bizarre mix of images moving across the screen that his half-asleep brain could not seem to process. Blinking a few times, he stared at the flickering TV screen. Watching a crazy guy scream about car deals frantically at the viewer. It took him even longer to realize that this wasn't their TV ... hell, this wasn't even their house. Sitting up abruptly in a panic, he looked around the room again, this time taking in everything. A hung-up punching bag, a dog bowl half full of dog food, crayons littered the ground, a handful of beer cans sat at the long dining room table, half-cleaned dishes sat in the sink. Oh, I'm still at the kendos. Relaxing at the thought, he let out a tired sigh, sinking back into the couch. Turning towards the extra weight on his side, he saw his mother curled up against him, her hands gripping his shirt for dear life. It was kind of nostalgic. His mother used to do that all of the time when he was younger. Cuddle against him in his bed when he had a bad dream or just a bad day in general. As he stared at her, the memories slowly started to come back to him. That's right, they never left. They were in no condition to go home after what happened, so they just came back here and crashed on the couch. I was supposed to be the one that pulls this no-name dojo out of obscurity. Not you. Frowning, he stared down at his broken hand, a newly applied cast wrapped around it to prevent him from injuring it more. A reminder of how weak he really was. Getting up carefully, he made sure not to wake his mother up. Sliding off of the couch, he arched his back before letting out a grunt. Sleeping on the couch with his mom sounded nice at the time. It being practical, however, was another thing entirely. Turning his head, he could see the faint traces of light peeking out of a door that he knew led into the garage. Heading over to it quietly, he fiddled with the doorknob. not used to using his offhand, before finally getting it open. Heading inside, he closed the door behind him. Wandering farther into the room, the first thing he noticed when he turned were two legs poking out of the bottom of Matsuo Kendo's old work truck. They moved a little as the person under the truck shifted their weight, their back laying against a rolling board as they worked. He knew those legs. Walking up to the truck, he watched her as she worked on the car in silence for a while before eventually knocking against the hood of the car. Jolting, he watched the figure jerk upright, slamming her head against something metal with a clang. He flinched at the noise. That had to hurt. She rubbed at her head before rolling out from under the car, Kendo's angry face peeking out to glare up at him. Smiling back, he couldn't help but laugh slightly at the small bruise on her forehead. A grease smear streaked across her face. "That's not funny," she huffed. Raising a hand to his mouth, he gave her a nod. "Why, you're right. Completely unamusing, Midoriya." "It's a little funny," he shot back with a smile. Rolling her eyes at him, she slid up from under the truck to stretch, her outfit covered in a layer of oil and grime. Looking up at her face, he couldn't help but stare at the bandage on her right cheek. He had heard from the paramedics that she needed several stitches and would have permanent scarring because of him. He offered to heal it once already, and she simply said don't. "It will just make me cooler." Honestly, he's not sure if that's possible. Raising her arms above her head, she grunted, the tank top rising up to show off more skin. Quickly looking away, Izuku scratched at his chin before talking. "I'm as surprised to see you up so early. I couldn't sleep." Looking away, she shrugged her shoulders. "I always feel better when I have something to do. It's a little relaxing going through the motions, you know. Plus it's good practice for when I get my first motorcycle." He raised his eyebrows at her. "You don't even have a license." "Not yet anyway, but just you wait. One day I'm going to ride all across Japan kicking butt and taking names on a sick motorcycle." Smiling at the thought, she blinked a few times before seeming to remember something. Turning, he watched her head to a trunk, swinging it open to look inside. "Which reminds me, I have a present." "Oh, a present? Why?" Pulling a few items out of it, she continued to talk. "Well, it was originally going to be your birthday present, but you didn't tell me about it until after it passed." Like a big jerk. Squinting at her tone, he frowned, rubbing at his arm. Opening his mouth to apologize again, he instead had a wad of leather flung at him. Fumbling slightly, he caught it, staring down at it in his hands. It was a biker jacket with a high collar and wide shoulders. His thumb ran over the rough black leather. Faint traces of green looked to be stitched within the inner lining of the coat. "Pretty cool, huh? Thank my mom. She went a little crazy with the stitching." But that's not even the best part. Looking up at Kendo, he hadn't realized that she had thrown on a matching jacket. Her back turned to him to reveal a bright orange logo, shaped like a clenched fist, stitched into it. Blinking at the sight, he slowly turned his own jacket over, staring at the back of it with surprise. Stitched into the fabric, there was an image of a bird with its wings spread wide. It screamed at the sky with a swath of flames around it. It was the same color as his Quirk's fire. "It's a phoenix. Pretty cool, right?" He could tell that she was smiling just off the sound of her voice. If she wanted to leave him speechless, she sure accomplished it. At that moment, Izuku found it hard to speak, even more so than usual. "Why? Because you always get back up. That's what I like the most about you." It's a little big." Walking up to him, she patted his shoulder. Looking up at her, Izuku was surprised to find that they were the same height. "When did that happen?" "I have a feeling you'll grow into it." Smirking, she shook her head. "Now if you're done catching flies with your open mouth, I think you have a train to catch." Staring at her, he turned to the clock on the wall, his eyes shooting open. Oh god, he's going to be so late. Pulling her into a quick hug, he didn't notice her tense against him before he turned and ran out of the garage. Kendo stood in the middle of the room watching him leave. Crossing her arms, she shook her head with a chuckle, a slight hint of red on her cheeks. Running into the living room, he found his mother already awake. She was staring at the TV. Running past her, he gave her a quick kiss on the cheek before dashing out the door. "Gotta get to class. Love you, bye," he shouted after her, the door slamming behind him. Inko stood, turning to where her son had just run off to and then back at the TV. On the TV was a scene of fire. A blonde boy struggled against a slime villain as a crowd of people and heroes watched on. Not a single person ran in to help him. Running along on the racetrack, Kyoikajiru frowned. She could feel green eyes on her the entire time she has been running, but she chose to ignore them. Ever since her talk with her new friends, she has been actively ignoring Midoriya. She felt terrible for doing it, but she knew it was for the best. The only problem is the nerd seems to not be taking the fucking hint. He would sit down next to her at lunch and she'd move. He'd ask if everything was okay and she wouldn't respond. She'd started to hide from him during break and he would still find her. How could one cute green-haired boy be so clingy? He keeps looking at her with those soft puppy dog eyes, and it was driving her crazy. A whistle snapped her from her thoughts. Letting out a small sigh of relief, she dashed into the changing room. Quickly changing out of her pea uniform, she made a mad dash to a class down the hall. Turning the corner, she put her back against the wall to stay out of sight. Her earphone jacks wiggled in an attempt to listen for him. She could hear footsteps a second later, quickly running to the hall before stopping. He didn't move after that. Taking a chance, she peeked around the corner to see Midoriya looking amongst the crowd. His eyes big as his head moved from side to side looking at the growing mass of people in the hall. He was looking for her. Pulling away, she slumped against the wall, sliding down it before curling into a ball. She couldn't hold back the small hiccup that escaped from her mouth as she squinted her eyes, running a hand along her hair. She's not sure how much more of this she could take. The final school bell of the day rang out through the halls. Throwing her hoodie on, she looked out the window. Dark clouds had hung overhead all day, promising rain, filling her with a dull ache that frustrated her. That's just her luck that she hated the sun like crazy, and now that she needed it most, it left her. If she's lucky, she won't get caught in it. She felt someone tap her shoulder and she half expected it to be Midoriya. Instead, she turned to see the smiling face of Sango. Smiling back, she gave a nod before following her after the rest of the group. Walking out into the growing cold air, she slid the hoodie up onto her head when she felt the starting remnants of rain pepper against her hair. Her hands kneaded into her jacket pockets as she walked, the rest of the claws walking beside her. They all talked amongst each other, but most of what her friends said went unheard over the beating of her own heart. For whatever reason, she had a bad feeling. The sound of frantic footsteps could be heard from behind her, lightly patting against the concrete before stopping, and she heard a voice she had learned to dread. Jiru. She stopped her step, his fist clenching into fist in her jacket pockets. Why now? Why can't he just let her go? Jiru, please, just talk to me. I don't know what I did to make you so angry. The way he spoke broke her heart. I'm sorry for whatever I did, I didn't mean to. Turning around quickly, she stomped her foot. Just stop, Midoriya. Just just stop. The rain had started to come down harder, a rhythmic tone that would normally make her feel at peace. Instead, it was making her feel worse. It came down hard around her and she found it harder and harder to meet his eyes. Rain ran down his face as he stared at her, confusion etched in every crevice. Will you please just leave me alone, Midoriya? For once I can finally fit in somewhere. I don't have to be alone anymore. We never friends, okay? I used you. Why, you don't mean that. You don't get it. You never did. You were the only person lower on the food chain than me, so I hung out with you so I wouldn't feel so alone. She couldn't stand the look he was giving her anymore. Every word she spoke was like a nail in a coffin, the light in his eyes that she cherished so much becoming dimmer. Turning away from him, she continued to walk, her friends following after her. Her final words feeling like the death of an imaginary friendship. I have new friends now. The rain came down hard against the stone-covered concrete as he watched her walk away, her back disappearing amongst a group of other girls. A part of him was relieved for the rain because then no one else would see him cry. Squinting against watery eyes, he panted, cold swaths of water running down his matted hair. He was unable to move, his legs shaking as he stood in the middle of a wave of departing teens. Placing a hand against his aching chest, he let out a small strangled hiccup. Turning, he started to run. He wasn't sure where he was even running to, but wherever he went, the footfalls of wet splashes followed him, each step only making his anxiety rise. Why are you muttering to yourself, freak? His ears rung, sound warping and shifting around him, a bizarre mix of being unable to hear and being overstimulated at every sound at the same time. Wide-eyed, he frantically looked around him, shapes moving past him in a blur of colors. Every deep and ragged breath clung to his throat like a wet clump strangled his mouth, leaving small gasps behind. Light shifted around him, making his eyes hurt, but he just kept running, paving a swath into the unknown. Panic attacks were no stranger to Izuku Midoriya. He had many over the years during his time at Aldera, but it's been a long time since he's felt this way. This hopeless and useless. This week, he ran until his legs started to give in, an aching soreness moving along his knees. Wobbling, his foot caught a slightly protruding brick, tumbling to the ground and rolling. His backpack fell to the ground, finding a spot in a nice wet puddle, opening to shower a handful of notebooks and school supplies upon the cold wet ground. Yet he did not care that his writing was ruined, that weeks of notes have been flung against the elements. Instead, his blurry eyes focused on the jacket laying on the ground. Crawling forward on his knees, he scooped it up into his arms, the stitched leather cold in his hands. Breathing slowly, he tried to stop his pounding heart, trying to focus on the exercises his psychologist taught him. Breathing in as slowly and as deeply as he could through his nose, he let out a breath, then another and another. Counting to 5, and between each breath he felt the anxieties slowly decrease. Closing his eyes, he muttered softly to himself, "These are just symptoms of high anxiety. There is nothing wrong with me." He repeated the phrase a few more times like a mantra until he could no longer feel his heart pounding in his chest. Slowly getting up, he held the jacket to his chest like an anchor in case he tried to fly away again. Standing up on weak knees, he padded over to slowly pick up his scattered stuff. Picking up one of his hero journeys, it was sopping wet, the paper practically falling apart in his hands. Throwing it and some of the other school supplies he could salvage into his bag, he looked around trying to figure out where he was. Walking down a few streets, he stared down at the floor and thought, Yet another friend had turned their back on him. He was starting to pick up on a pattern. Was that all he was? Someone to spend time with him until someone better comes along. In a weird way it made sense. Who would actually want to spend time with him? His gaze was drawn to the bright green logo stitched into the back of the jacket. Beautiful stitching and an amazing image stared back at him like it was mocking him. A part of him believed that he didn't deserve everything given to him. All of the warm hugs, kind looks and praise was so foreign to him. Even if it's almost been a year since then. Looking up, he stared at a broken mirror laying against a wall across the way. The center of it splintered and shattered, warping the image. He stared at the cracked image of himself in the mirror and he found himself frowning. The kendos, his mom and the psychiatrist would always tell him how strong he was. But he didn't feel strong. He felt as weak as they came, even now. I don't get what the kendos see in you. Just a scrawny little punk that got lucky a few too many times. Kazuki was right. He wasn't strong. He wasn't brave. He was nothing really. And a part of him worried how long it would take for the others to realize that. How long could Kendo worry about him before she gets tired of it? Tired of him? Light drifted in from the corner of his eye, drawing him to it. Shining from a TV screen through a glass window of a convenience store was the image of All Might. Wandering closer, he looked it over. The screen was playing a commercial he had seen way too many times. All Might's big, encouraging smile felt like a center of warmth in a harsh world. Reaching forward, he slid his cast-covered hand along the wet glass, speaks of light shining through plaster and fiberglass. All Might never cried. Even in the darkest of times, he stood like a smiling beacon. As light, a challenge to those who hid in the darkness and a comfort to those who found safety in the light. All Might was the strongest of all of them. Staring at the scene of All Might with his trademark smile, he squinted his face, forcing a smile on his face before losing it. He just needed to get stronger. Like All Might. Kendo was worried. She paced back and forth, a grove forming on the carpet from how many times she's walked over it already. Midoriya hadn't shown up to the dojo today and no one has heard from him for a couple hours. It was so unlike him to be late to anything. She had yet to tell his mother in a hope that she was worrying over nothing. Inko was a sweet woman, but she wasn't sure if that woman could survive another heart attack. Clenching her fist, she let out a frustrated huff. It was probably that school again. Leave it to Midoriya to leave a horrible toxic environment just to bounce right into another. Sometimes she worries that Izuku has a secret second quirk, one that draws trouble to him like a magnet. Unclenching her hand, she sighed. There was no point in worrying so much. If she doesn't hear from him in a couple hours, she'll let the proper people know. Walking down the steps of her room, she peeked into the quiet living room, thinking about working on something in the garage, but thought against it. She gets too distracted doing that. Heading down a couple more stairs, she paused at a sound. It was faint, but it was the sound of smacking. Following the sound, she stopped at the door leading into the dojo, leaning against it for a second. Someone was hitting the punching bag. Relief hit her almost instantly. Letting out a tired sigh, she placed a hand against her chest. Sounds like Midoriya was working out late again. He must be making up for lost time earlier. Kendo felt a little conflicted. She half wanted to go in there and scold him for making her worry, but another part of her just wanted to go in there and hug him. My dad is right. Maybe I do coddle him too much. Swinging the doors open, she walked inside, turning a corner before walking onto the hardwood floor of the dojo. Straight ahead of her, Midoriya was hitting the punching bag, each blow shaking it from the strikes. He really was going to town on that thing. Opening her mouth to scold him for not wrapping his knuckles again, she paused, her gaze flickering to his perfectly wrapped fist as they hit the bag. You would think that she would feel relieved that Midoriya was finally listening to her suggestions, but instead she felt a wave of something else. Something was off about the air around him, but she couldn't figure out what it was. Standing there, she shifted her weight uncomfortably before raising a hand and coughing into it. Hey Midoriya, I noticed that you didn't show up to class today. Kendo couldn't help but tense a little when Midoriya slowly turned to face her. Turning towards her, he gave her a smile and a nod. Oh, sorry about that, Kendo. I got a little distracted at school, you know how that goes. There was something off about his smile. She had known Izuku Midoriya for almost a year now, and this smile was different. It wasn't the bright smile he usually gave when he was talking about heroes or quirks. He didn't look at her with that gentle shine that made her heart skip a beat sometimes. Instead, this smile, while nice, was thinner, more guarded. It didn't give off the same comfort as his usual smile, and the smile didn't seem to meet his eyes. It was like like looking through a mask. Blinking, she frowned a little as she looked him over. Is everything okay, Midoriya? He stared back, blinking a few times at her, confused, before giving her that same smile. Everything is fine, Kendo. I guess I'm just feeling a little tired. Turning, she watched him started to head for the door. Even though they were in the same room, she suddenly felt like they were miles away from each other. I should probably start heading home. Okay. I'll see you tomorrow, Midoriya. It came off more as a question than a statement. Walking towards the door, he turned towards her before smiling. Yeah, see you tomorrow. Closing the door behind him, she stared at the door. worry nipping at her lip. He didn't stutter at all during the conversation. Kendo had always prided herself on being a good judge of character. She never had a problem reading a person's true intentions before, and she sure as hell wasn't afraid of letting people know how she really felt. But that, for whatever reason, she could not get a single read on Midoriya. She had no idea what he was thinking or how he was feeling, and that worried her. Shaking her head, she ran a hand along her ponytail. She was being crazy, right? Maybe he was just having an off day. She's sure he'll go back to normal by tomorrow, right? The grass crunched under his feet as he ran. Commotion could be heard behind him as Izuku Midoriya pushed a low tree branch out of the way, practically smacking himself in the face with it on the rebound. He was young, had to be at least 9 or 10. Shaking his head, his big bush of green hair swayed to and fro, leaves falling out of it as he ran, a few stray sticks poking out of it. Stumbling a little, he quickly caught himself, only staggering for a second before he continues his mad dash. The sound of multiple boys shouting could be heard, gradually getting louder. Where did he go? He's so fast for someone so short. I think he went this way. Ignoring the shouts, he ran under a tree, zipping from spot to spot to avoid being spotted. He was almost home. Only a few more blocks now and he was home free. Hey, turning a corner around a bush, he found himself running straight into an arm, knocking him to the ground. Staring up at the blue sky, 2 arms of a bigger boy wrapped around him, pulling him to his feet and holding him still against his chest. Izuku tried to kick his tiny feet in a vain attempt to get free of the boy's hold, but to no avail. The sound of multiple footsteps got closer and closer until the tree's branches before him parted. Kaken marching through it with a big stick he found walking around the little park they used to play at. Behind him, a group of other boys following quickly behind him. Every once in a while he would swing it down on a low branch or random bush to show his dominance as he walked. Gotcha, Deku. He smugly chuckled at him. Oh, let me go, Kaken. Not until you learn your place. Shaking his head, Izuku could feel tears start to form in his eyes. I didn't do anything. Oh no, spoke one of the other boys. Walking forward from the group, he smirked. In his hands was a notebook. His notebook. What's this then? Hey, gee, give that back. Ignoring his cries, the boy tossed it to Kaken, which he easily caught before looking down at it with a frown. Opening it, he turned a few pages before frowning even more. Izuku could tell that he was getting angrier after every paragraph he read. Hero notes for the future 5. Kaken angrily muttered to himself before tossing it to the ground. Raising a foot, he brought it down on the flimsy notebook, grinding it into the dirt with her heel. You're still trying to be a hero. Kaken, it's not what it looks like. It looks like you're not listening to me. Again, he involuntarily flinched at his shout before shaking his head quickly. Izuku tried desperately to think of an excuse. And no, I wasn't. I was. The entire time he was talking, Kaken was staring at the ground. Turning his head in thought, he growled, "Let him go, Jumbo. I can deal with him." The boy immediately let him go. Izuku falling to his knees from the force. Getting up slowly, Izuku looked up to see that the other boys were now standing in a circle, Kaken walking closer to him. Kaken, please. How many times do I have to tell you can't be a hero until you get it through your thick skull? Cracking his fist, Kaken frowned. Whatever. I don't even need a quirk to show you your place. Taking some steps back, Izuku raised his hand, green embers moving along his fingers. Stay back. They paused for a split second before the circle of boys laughed at the display, their voices coming from all around him. What are you going to do with that, Deku? Heal my cavities. Raised his arms in a poorly made guard. Kaken's fist hit him clean in the stomach, knocking him to the ground. That was the first time he was ever hit, and boy did it sting. Crumbling to the ground, Izuku coughed, throat burning, stomach aching. Curling up into a ball, tears ran down his face. More laughter rang out around them. That's it. One hit and you crumble. You're pathetic, Deku. Grabbing him by the hair, he forced him to look up at his red burning eyes. Let me say this again. All you will ever be is support for the people that really matter. That's all you can ever be. Letting his head go, he stood back up. Earning, he continued his march. The other boys smirking at him before turning to follow after him. Midoriya, but don't let it get to you too much. Every hero needs his fans. Who knows, maybe one day you'll have the honor of healing my wounds. Midoriya, just hang in there. You'll make a cute nurse one day. Midoriya. Midoriya, are you even listening to me? Opening his eyes, he jerked his head, looking around the train in a hazy gaze. Eyes flickered over the packed train of young adults. The first thing he immediately picked up on was that a good chunk of them were watching him, annoyance evident in their eyes. Looking from person to person, however, he could see it wasn't all of them. A few of them looked amused, however, one girl in the crowd staring back at him and giggling softly when he turned to her. Running a hand down along his face, he wiped some drool from his lip before turning to his right to find the source of the voice and his best friend Izuku Kendo. The seats bouncing in a slow hypnotic motion that he found almost peaceful. Probably why he fell asleep. Or he was just tired from training too hard. Letting out a yawn, Izuku Midoriya sat up a little, raising his arms in the air to give a big stretch. He was older, dressed in his high school's black uniform, a uniform that he had to have replaced multiple times because he kept outgrowing them. Normally buttoned up, his was opened, a green t-shirt peeking from underneath. Rolled-up sleeves revealed thick, strong-looking arms, faint scars tracing along his right hand. Thick curly green hair up top and a buzzed undercut beneath. Just a dream. I haven't thought of that in a long time. Looking out the window of the train, he watched the skyline of buildings zip past, a moving horizon where the recent rising sun had just started to change the color of the sky to a beautiful blue. The morning sun shone against his face, making him squint. Looking back at Kendo, he stared. She was wearing a different school uniform, her orange hair tied up into a long ponytail swaying lightly in the wind. A long jagged scar ran along her cheek, her arms crossed as she lightly tapped her foot. Although whatever he missed made her angry, better fix it. Giving her an easy smile, he nodded. Yes, I was drinking in every word you said. Raising an eyebrow at him, she continued to frown, her hands going to her sides. Oh really? What was I saying then? Okay, if he was honest, he wasn't listening at all. He was too busy thinking about stuff. Shrugging, he let out a sigh as he ran his fingers through the top fluff of his green hair. You were talking about how awesome you are ... and to tell me to eat my veggies. Almost instantly he winced when he felt the familiar feeling of her fist hitting his shoulder, not super hard but just hard enough to hurt. A couple chuckles could be heard around them as he rubbed it. Like, I need to tell you that. I'm the coolest person you know. Jabbing a thumb at herself, she smiled before thinking for a second. Her eyebrows raised in thought before looking back at him. Okay, fine, I'll just ask. What's wrong? The mask didn't move, his head tilting slightly. What makes you think something is wrong? Letting out a scoff, she rolled her eyes before gesturing to him. Because it's you. You may pretend to be all tough and strong now, but you forget, I grew up with you. I know you're still that stuttering, anxious crybaby deep down. Okay, ouch, that was a little harsh ... even if it's a little true. He could never completely fool her, huh? No matter how much he tried to play it off, she always worried about him. That's just the kind of person Kendo is, he guessed. Sighing, he sagged a little in his seat before shrugging his shoulders casually. He made sure not to meet her eyes. I'm just feeling a little nervous. Happy now. Always. It honestly feels great to be the one that constantly wins. You should try it sometime. Huffing, he waved her away with his arm before turning to stare out the window again, watching the city fly by. To think it's been 3 years since he met Kendo. Just trying to think back on everything that happened within that time made his head want to spin. His mom suing Aldra into the ground, the big juicy settlement, him transferring districts and being flung into a new school just to still get bullied, signing up for karate classes, meeting Kendo, and practically getting adopted into a family of very protective gingers. All of the hardships in between ... Who would have guessed it all would lead to this? Taking a train to UA for their entrance exam with his best friend. How time flies. Snapping out of his thought process, he felt Kendo pat his shoulder, slowly turning to look at her. Don't sweat it too much, big guy, she said in a more gentle tone. We've trained forever for this. All we can do now is go out there and kick ass. Looking over at her, he could feel a small genuine smile peek from behind the mask. Yeah ... You're always right. I know. She smiled back at him, raising her closed fist out to him. Now what do you say, rivals? Returning the smile, he leaned forward, tapping her fist with his own. Yeah, rivals. The rest of the train ride to UA was pretty peaceful, all things considered. Him and Kendo mostly quizzed each other on a few topics for the written part of the test to pass the time before devolving into other conversation. She was currently excitedly talking about the junker motorcycle she found at the dump and was ranting about how she was going to turn it into the coolest bike ever when he felt the train lurch to a stop. He could practically feel the nervousness in the air as everyone got up one at a time and formed a big line to get off. A wave of other students participating in the entrance exam flowing out in droves. Letting out a breath, he closed his eyes, his hand gripping the seat rest tightly before letting it go. This was it. Now or never. Stepping off of the train, he looked up at the massive campus, the main building a sheer monolith practically blocking out the sun. He remembered reading once that the main building of UA consisting of 4 long towers with bridges connecting the 4 of them together in the shape of a giant H. The rest of the campus consisted of smaller buildings scattered all around that were mostly used for separate classes and dorms. A long high wall stretching completely around the campus like the gate to a castle. From what he heard, the protection system was one of the finest in the world. He had seen what UA looked like on TV since he was a child, but even then he had no idea how big it truly was, how awe-encompassing it was. Pictures simply did not do it justice. He couldn't even imagine how much money something like this would cost. Following the large crowd down and off the train, he gripped his day pass tightly to his chest as he walked through the gate. A soft ping sound ringing out, followed by a green light telling him he was good to enter. Turning a corner with Kendo in tow, he was a little surprised to find the place was already packed full of people. The train they were on was packed, but there was even more people inside the campus. Groups of young adults from all walks of life talking amongst themselves and wandering about. It was a little intimidating. So many people and only a few actually allowed into the hero course. Feeling Kendo brush her shoulder against him, she kept walking. Looking over her shoulder for a second, she raised her eyebrows at him before disappearing into the crowd of people. Yeah, she has the right idea. No point in psyching himself out. With a shake of his head and a double palm slap to his cheeks, he followed after her, walking past some people and further onto the campus. Kendo's bright orange hair stuck out like a sore thumb in the massive group of people, making it easy to follow her. A plus to being on the taller side of things. Muttering excuse mess as he went, he waded into the crowd, trying to be as polite as he could as he walked past. Placing a hand on a woman's shoulders, he gently smiled down at her before easing her out of the way, unaware of her blushing face as he moved past. Moving across a wave of students, he was unaware of a familiar group of eyes watching him from afar. A handful of girls stopping their conversation to stare. A group of punk rock girls wore all black spiky vests and were adorned with all kinds of buttons and patches. They looked so different than any other person that were in their high school's uniform. Leaning against the railing to the stairs on an upper floor, Yashimura took in the sight of Midoriya, her tail swishing softly behind her. Her voice was like a soothing purr as she spoke. Oh my, is that Midoriya? He was here. Now, sitting up quickly, Jiru put everything in her not to quickly look at where Yashimura was looking. Instead, she lazily turned her head, her eyes immediately zeroing in on his green hair. He looked so different now, taller and really strong looking, yet radiated an aura of confidence and kindness even from here. Next to her, Yashimura let out a small giggle as she tapped her long finger against her mouth. I know, right? Bouncing up next to her, Sango took in the sight of him as well, her short bright blue hair constantly moving like it was in the wind. She watched him for a few minutes before letting out a sigh, flopping down next to Jiru to place her head in her lap. Waving her arms around, she puffed out her cheeks. I tried to flirt with him a few days ago, and all he said was sorry I don't spend time with bullies, but he didn't look like that before. It's not fair. It sounds like she got off easy, all things considered. Letting out a whistle, Sheikah placed 2 hands on her hips. Who knew the little guy had it in him? She knew, leaning and she lightly elbowing Jiru's side. Kyle girl, you used to be his friend before hanging out with us. Be a gal pal and put a good word in. I'm sure he misses you. Looking over Midoriya's disappearing frame, she felt a wave of sadness come over her before shaking her head. Getting up from her spot, she started to head farther into the campus, her arms raising to rub at her neck. Sorry girls, I'm pretty sure I'm in the same boat as the rest of you. The sounds of disappointed boos from her girlfriends could be heard behind her as they followed after, unable to see the depressed look in Jiru's eyes. Finally catching up to Kendo, she smiled up at him for a second before looking back at one of the many UA maps that looked to be spread out about the campus grounds. Her eyes flickered across the screen before frowning. Looks like they're separating us based on school. Raising a finger, she poked at where she was supposed to go before pointing to his school's meetup location. Our meetup points are on opposite sides of the auditorium. Guess they plan on filing us in from different sides of the building to avoid overcrowding. Looking up at the map, he frowned slightly before nodding. Made sense. He was hoping to spend a little more time with Kendo, especially since she was helping to keep his anxiety in check, but splitting up looked to be unavoidable. Looking back down at her, he was a little surprised to see that she was looking up at him like she could read his mind. You're gonna be okay, bae. You should worry about yourself. I hear the written test is pretty hard this year, especially the math part. He smirked as she went rigged for a second before letting out a huff. Shut up, I'm great at math. Looking away, she started to head off towards her group before turning to face him one last time. See you on the other side. Raising a hand, he gave her a small wave as he watched her orange hair disappear amongst the waves of other classes. Lowering it slowly, he sighed. Great. Turning to head where he was supposed to go, he tried to hide his shaking hands in his pockets. He hates to admit it, but stress was building way higher than he originally thought. He couldn't help but feel that people were staring at him wherever he went. Looking over his shoulder, a couple people that he walked past quickly looked away to avoid eye contact. Did he look that out of place? So lost in his own thoughts, Izuku wasn't looking where he was walking straight into another potential classmate, both of them stumbling for a second before righting themselves. Izuku was so used to looking down, he was surprised to find someone just as tall as he was. Staring back at him, surprised through a pair of glasses, was a young adult about his age. He was broad, cleanly cut blue hair parted to reveal strong-looking blue eyes. Oh, my bad. Are you okay? The blue-haired man stared at him for a second before raising a hand to cough into it. Yes, I am all right. My apologies. I came early today in hopes to beat the crowd, but I'm afraid I did not succeed. I am in a bit of a hurry to make it to my designated entry point. Talk about uptight. I get it. I'm kind of in the same boat. Sorry again for running into you. This is not a boat. It is a campus. What? The blue-haired man paused for a second before blushing slightly. I apologize. My brother always says it is best to break the ice with a joke. I may be a little nervous. Blinking a few times at the odd man, he couldn't help but let out a laugh. That's all right. I think everyone is a little nervous right now. Reaching a hand out, he smiled. I'm Izuku Midoriya. Firmly taking his hand, he shook it with a smile of his own. Tenya Ida. It has been a pleasure, Midoriya, but I must hurry to my spot post haste. Hopefully I will see you in there. Turning, Ida quickly walked off, leaving Izuku alone again. And don't forget to button up your school uniform. First impressions are important. He weirdly felt a little better. Shaking his head, he turned to head back into the crowd to fight his way to his spot. Kendo would probably get a kick out of that guy. Leaving the test room, Kayukajiru found herself funneled into another room down the hall. Signing a stack of papers and forms, she was handed a piece of paper and then ushered into a seat with the rest of her school. The second auditorium was just as massive. Seats lining along the room in the hundreds. Walking past a few people she saw around school, she stopped at her designated seat before turning to stare at the person sitting next to her. Oh my god, are you fucking kidding me? It had been a long time since she's seen him. The last time was through squinting blurry tears in the rain. Looking back at her with a smile, he looked surprised for a second before smiling again. The smile looked different than she was used to, more strained, something twisted in her gut. Despite all of her avoidance and all of her efforts, Izuku Midoriya stared back at her with his bright green eyes yet again. They stared at each other for a long moment. She so desperately wanted to say anything to him, but instead her mouth refused to move. What do you even say? Sorry I abandoned you. I'm a terrible person. Hey, good to see you again. How's back after I stabbed it? Man, you're kind of hot now. She could pretend like it never happened, like the 2 years of them not speaking was for no reason. But she knew that wouldn't work. She could beg on her hands and knees for forgiveness in front of all of these people. No, she was too big of a coward to do that. Before she could think about what to say, Midoriya spoke first, giving her that same smile and a nod before looking back to the stage. Hello Jiru, good to see you. This entire time she was so worried about seeing him again, about how he would yell at her and scream about how horrible a person she was. But what just happened ... was somehow worse than him yelling. This entire time she was so worried about how badly he would act if he ever saw her again. She never once considered what she would do if he didn't yell or scream at all. If instead he just met her with cold indifference. The written part of the test wasn't too bad, honestly. He was feeling anxious before the test and he had hit some snags here or there, but overall the questions weren't terrible. He had been good at math his entire life and science was a memory thing more than anything. Izuku was so excited to see that Ectoplasm was holding the test this year he was half tempted to ask for an autograph ... but he decided against it. The bus he and a group of other students sat on rolled down the road. An uncomfortable silence hung over everyone's heads as they took the long drive to the testing site. President Mike said it would only take about 15 to 30 minutes, but the drive felt much longer than that. Rubbing a hand along his scarred hand, he felt his anxiety spike with every bump in the road. Slow, deep breaths. Think about the situation strategically and don't dwell on the what-ifs. Fighting robots. Because of course their test was fighting robots. The test couldn't have been something more physically possible for him, huh? He was unsure how well he would even do against big chunks of metal. It's not like his quirk could help him in a fight ... And then there was the whole thing about a mysterious secret robot that wasn't worth any points. Because he clearly didn't have enough to worry about. Pulling up to a stop, the bus's sliding doors opened. Izuku found himself getting off of the bus and following the rest of the participants to a section with their number written on it. A long white line painted in the dirt a distance away from a massive door that he assumed was their entrance. Walking to the front, he towed the white line, his gaze flickering over the setup. Over the big wall he could see the tips of buildings that kind of reminded him of a construction site. From his research, most villain activity was within city lines. Dark alleyways and branching halls made it easy to sneak around from prying eyes. His best guess was this was their way of replicating that. Getting down into a wide fighting stance, he punched forward, his uniform swished with a rippling sound. His left arm going to his hip before punching forward again. Swinging his opposite arm forward, the sleeve to his arm shifted with a crack. Each punch was an attempt to knock his anxieties away. It was something he learned at the Kendo's dojo. Doing katas helped him resurface himself, be more calm under high stress. Taking a deep breath, he closed his eyes before standing up straight again. His fist cocked and held at his sides. Opening his right hand, he stared down at it, the rough calluses and net of twisting scars staring back at him. How was he supposed to tear apart robots with his bare hands? Frowning, he felt the anxiety start to come back in full force. This was crazy. Deep down he knew he couldn't do this. Maybe he could sneak away and just lie, saying he got lost or something along the way. The flash of a memory came to him. Kendo was younger, her face bruised and her clothes dirty. Smiling big at him, he saw that blood flowed down from an open wound on her cheek. With shaking knees, she stood up, raising her bleeding hand out to him curled into a fist. We may not be amazing now, but together ... you and I can become the best heroes this world had ever seen. Reaching a clenched fist forward, he thrust it forward like he was fist-bumping a memory. Opening his eyes flashed a bright green, a spark of green fire flashing from his mouth for a mere second. No, he wasn't going to just give up. What was he doing? He was a Midoriya, damn it. There are two things Midoriyas are known for in this world, and that is crying way too much and never giving up. He thought of his mom, the smiling Kendo family, his sensei, Izuku. Marching forward to the line painted on the ground, he unbuttoned his uniform, the two ends billowing in the wind as he punched his hand. Not only is his mom cheering him on, but he made a promise to Kendo. He had something to fight for, time to prove everyone wrong. Present Mike's voice could be heard, deafening the tense silence. And begin. Everyone looked amongst each other, confused, heads shooting up and looking around before looking up at the sky. Izuku blinked a few times before turning around to stare up at the announcement tower a bit away. Wait, what? That was ... very weirdly timed. Why is everyone just standing around staring at the sky like a bunch of turkeys? Present Mike shouted back down at them. That means go. You don't get countdowns in real life. Go, go, go. Whipping his head around to the big doors, he was surprised to find that the door was already open. A handful of other students already running through the gate in a frenzied blitz. People ran past him in an attempt to join the moving crowd. Taking one final deep breath, Izuku got down into a runner stance, muttered something under his breath, and bolted into the growing chaos. Izuku may not have a powerful flashy quirk like the rest of the people taking the test, but he learned fairly quickly that he had something the others didn't. He was physically fit. After he was left behind by the rest of the class, he was a little worried that he would not be able to catch up to them, but was surprised to find that passing them was pretty easy. Being one of the last people in made it easier to avoid being corralled into the crowd all rushing the big doors at once. Zipping past a bunch of other contestants, he noticed that a good chunk of them were already out of breath, like most of them were not used to running at all. Running past a flying laser, he noticed a one-pointer off by the side. Running full speed at the smaller robot, he flung all of his weight into it, toppling it over onto its side before climbing onto it and slamming his elbow into its face. Watching the neck snap upward, it twitched a little before it stopped moving. Not dwelling on the excitement that he got a point, he rolled off of the robot before diving back into the fray. Ducking under a rocket, he dived down a branching alleyway out of the way of the big fight going on in the middle of the street, instead deciding to go pick off stragglers. He may be stronger than some of them, but even he couldn't outperform a student that can make sound waves or shoot lasers in terms of power. The sounds of battle echoed around him as he ran, explosions going off left and right off in the distance. Every loud explosion was putting him on edge, his body jerking after every big bang. Guess I have some leftover trauma with the whole Bakugo thing, huh? Shaking it off as best as he could, he pushed his advance through the alleyway, spotting a second one-pointer running down a hallway. It didn't look like it saw him. Jumping onto the back of it, he wrapped a forearm around its neck, wrenching it to the side before pulling it to the ground. The single wheel spun in place in a desperate attempt to free itself, but to no prevail. Crashing his fist into it over and over, he didn't stop hitting it until it stopped moving. Letting the limp body go, he panted, running a hand along his sweaty face. That was only 2 points, and he was already a little out of breath. This may be a problem. Rolling backwards against the blow, his back hit the wall, his hand clutching his chest. What the hell? That really hurt. Who the hell programmed these things to be so ruthless? Not finding a chance to breathe, he ducked under a second strike from its massive tail. Raising his fist, it collided with cold, harsh metal, his teeth gritting from the punch. Reeling back, he hit it again, the metal bending under his fist this time before caving in. The massive frame of the two-pointer collapsing into a pile of scraps before him. Panting, he looked down at his bleeding knuckles. That was only the 15th robot. He could take on the one-pointers fairly easily, but the two-pointers and three-pointers were a completely different story. The difference in size between the three types were crazy. Three-pointers were basically tanks. He could hear numbers being shouted all around him, and they were way bigger than that. This wasn't working. He didn't seem to have time to process that information before another, much bigger three-pointer came out of an alleyway, barreling at him like a bat out of hell. He was unable to avoid the screeching metal death trap, feeling it clipping against his shoulder before being flung back against another wall, knocking a trash can over in the process. Sitting up slowly, he winced at a sharp pain in his shoulder. Looking up, he saw the three-pointer start to back up slowly, turning to face him again. Okamen. Grabbing at the trash can, Izuku desperately flung it at the machine, covering its three eyes for a second. Turning, he started to run, bolting as fast as he could towards an incoming wall. The sound of metal screeching behind him told him it was getting close again. He could practically feel the tips of metal of the grill poking at his back. Sweat ran down his face as he ran, Leaping at the wall, he took a few steps up it before diving back over the massive tank-like monster. Landing back onto his feet, he wobbled slightly, falling to one knee, watching as it ran face first into the wall, the brick wall cracking under the force. Not giving it a chance to back up, he ran up the back of it, climbing down to its face. Raising a fist, he slammed it against one of the 3 red eyes on the massive machine, the glass of the eye cracking under each blow. After the 4th hit, the glass shattered, the red eyes going dim before collapsing on the ground. Letting out a harsh cough, Izuku Midoriya slowly crawled off of the robot, rolling his shoulder before wincing. That little stunt really messed up his shoulder. Great. Leaning against the wall for support, he walked down the alleyway. Following the sounds of destruction, he wandered back into the street, his hand holding his injured shoulder. Standing in the entrance of the alleyway, he could see a bunch of other examines destroying robots like they were nothing. A massive hairy beast tore through one pointers with his bare hands. Grabbing one by the waist, he lifted it into the air before taking hold of its head and wrenching it from its body with a loud roar. Running past him, he watched Ida from early spin and slice a robot in half with his engine-like legs, not even bothering to look behind him as he ran on. A blonde-haired man shot lasers out of a belt on his waist, ripping through a 2-pointer like it was nothing. God, he was an idiot for thinking he could pull this off, wasn't he? Of course, the most sought-after school in the country was going to weed out the weak ones. All of those years of training, and it still didn't match the power of a Quirk. Watching a pink girl throw acid at a 3-pointer's eyes blinding it, he wondered what it felt like to be born with such a power. Being able to blow away a robot with a laser, or be able to run fast and kick a robot in half. Watching some of the other contestants destroy robots like they were no big deal, all he could really do was let out a harsh self-deprecating laugh. I wonder what Kendo would say right now if she saw how pathetic I looked. BOOM. The ground shook beneath him, his legs shaking in a vain attempt to stay up before falling to his knees. Gazing around, he saw that everyone else was doing the same. A panicked look in their eyes as they tried to figure out what was going on. What the hell was that? Almost like it was answering his question, the ground shook again. A series of bangs getting louder and louder as it got closer. Placing his hand on a nearby wall, he pulled himself to his feet, leaning against the wall for support. Turning the corner, he saw it, his gaze starting at the wheel before looking up and up and up again. A massive behemoth of a robot, its lumbering frame crushing the street as it went, the concrete cracking under the sheer weight of the thing. Smoke of destroyed debris covered the bottom of the robot like a smoke screen. Raising a massive fist, Izuku watched in horror as the thing punched a hole in a building. The ground shook, the building falling apart under its own weight. What the hell? Izuku's heart skipped a beat at the sight. The thing was massive, as big as a building. Staring up at it, people ran past him, attempting to get as far away from it as possible. Others seemed to dive down alleyways in a frantic move for more points. What the hell was he doing? This was insane. There's no way that he could do anything against something like that. Watching it in odd terror, it turned a corner before destroying a second building. Driving through the remains of the building as if it were just a speed bump, it started to head down a street, not even seeming to care about the ant-sized people taking the test. This thing was going to kill someone. Fear ran down his body, a feeling of fight or flight coursing through his veins. Flight 1. That is until he saw her. Turning to run from the monstrous machine, a hint of brown caught his eye. A brunette woman face down on the street with a massive slab of rock on top of her. She didn't even make a sound, her body limp and unmoving amongst the chaos of the battlefield. She just laid there unconscious, a small pool of red forming around her head. He froze, his eyes unable to leave her unmoving body. Time could have stopped or slowed around him for a solid minute and he would not have noticed. Shouts and screams erupted around him, yet he did not move, all of the sound drowning out and only leaving the noise of the beating of his own heart. The machine was heading in her direction. Maybe it didn't see her, or maybe it just didn't care. His heart continued to race at the sight, his good arm clenching. He only really noticed he was walking towards it when a person shoulder checked him running past. What the hell was he doing? There was a reason he wanted to be a hero. Making a mad dash into the fray, he stumbled into the smoke. Sliding to a halt at the unconscious girl, he bent down, gripping under the large slab of rock. Closing his eyes, his muscles tensed under the strain, his bad shoulder flaring up from the exertion. Letting it go, he groaned, his hand rubbing at her bad shoulder. Shit, again. Trying to lift it a second time seemed to do just as little. He was too hurt right now. Not strong enough. If he still had his good shoulder, he might be able to move this on his own. Turning to look around, he frantically looked for someone to help, his green eyes stopping at a familiar blue-haired man with glasses. Ada was just staring. He was obviously shell-shocked, his eyes hazed over and wide. Ada, don't just stand there. Help me lift this. Izuku screamed at him, panic in his voice. That seemed to snap him out of it. The man shook his head before looking over at him, nodding. His voice was loud as he weirdly enough saluted him. All right. Running towards him, he settled next to Izuku, his hands going under the other side. The 0-pointer was way too close for his liking. The ground rattled as it got closer and closer, a rumbling so strong that it was shaking his bones. With the third heave he felt the rock move, if only a little. Yes, common, almost there. Screaming under the pain, he tried a fourth time, pain rocketing through his shoulder. The shadow towering over them stretched as it got closer, encompassing them in an overcast of dread. Staring at the ground, he could see the stretching shadow getting closer and closer. So this was it, huh? Dying under a giant robot trying to save a girl. Honestly, he could think of worse ways to go out. Maybe life really does flash before your eyes right before you die ... or maybe one of those blows gave him a concussion. But he thought about the past again. A guidance counselor giving him that look when he said he wanted to be a hero. The teacher shaking his head before sliding him a job pamphlet for being a nurse. The angry tear-covered eyes of Kyoyuka as she spun around to glare at him. A group of girls watching them with amused looks on their faces. A single, lone shot of Bakugo when they were still friends. Turning towards him, he smiled, showing off that he just lost a single tooth. Eyes shooting open, he channeled all of that anger, all of that pain, and he screamed, his knees buckling as he strained to lift it. Tears prickling at his eyes. If this really was the end ... he was going to go out the same way he came in, kicking and screaming. God damn it. The rock moved, shifting and lifting under his grasp just to fall back down again. He really thought that was the end for him, dying surrounded by strangers trying to do something everyone told him he could. Well ... if he did go out, he's kind of glad he went out trying. Closing his eyes, he accepted his fate. The sound of footsteps running not away but towards them. Snapping his eyes open, he turned just in time to watch a red spiky-haired man run past. Red lightning covered his body as he knelt down and leapt into the air, soaring past him at an insane speed. His green hair shook with the force of his leap, wind parting around them. Reeling a fist back, the mysterious man destroyed the zero-pointer with a single punch. The head of the robot coming clean off, pieces of it shooting off of its body. Chunks of robot fell around them as the zero-pointer toppled backwards with an earth-shaking bang. The red-haired man falling from the sky and collapsing in the horizon. Oh God, he hoped he was okay. Over the intercoms a buzzer went off, the few remaining robots immediately stopping in place before shutting down. Guess that's it for the test. Turning in time, he watched a third guy with crazy purple hair run up. His tired eyes stared at him before leaning down and wordlessly helping them lift. With a third person, they were finally able to get the rock off of her, sliding her out into the open. Izuku immediately checked her palm for a pulse, relieved to find that she still had one. It was there ... just really faint. Channeling the medic classes he took a year ago, he checked her over. It looks like she for the most part has a messed up ankle, hip, and the back of her head is split open. Is she dead? Grumbled the purple man, his eyes looking her over. Bite your tongue. There is no way such a prestigious school such as UA would allow someone to die on their grounds. We need to get her to a hospital tent. I saw them on the way in, they should surely help us, bellowed Tenye, turning to shout at the tired man only for the tired man to stare back at him unblinking. I don't know ... we did sign waivers on the way in. Tuning their argument out, he sighed, the faded sound of their voices bickering behind him. Looking down at his hand, he closed his eyes. Focusing on the warmth coursing through his body, he focused it down to his closed hand, imagining the flame. Opening his hand with a pop, a jade flame sparking across it before covering his hand. Not turning around, he reached his hand forward as he spoke, the other two staring at him with wide-eyed stares. There's no need, I've got it. Running his burning hand over her ankle, he took a deep breath. Focusing on the static coursing through her, he took hold of it and pulled it towards him, absorbing it into himself. Sliding his hand farther up, his flaming fingers danced along her hip, caressing it for a second to do the same thing before moving up again. Sitting her up slowly, he leaned in close, his head pressing against hers as his hand went over the injury at the back of her head. One deep breath and he pulled the hand away, revealing the injury completely healed. Speaking the words like a mantra, he whispered it to her. It's going to be okay. Because I am here. It's safe to say that Ochako Uraraka was not having a good day. Leaving her folks over a month ago to move to the big city was probably one of the hardest things she had ever done. There was a lot of crying during their goodbyes, but they told her repeatedly how proud of her they were. It hurt, it was painful, but she knew it was for the best. The sooner she becomes an amazing hero, the sooner she could go home and save her family from back-breaking labor after all. Heading into town, she was thinking about all of the things she was going to shower her family with when she came across her first road bump on her journey. The place her parents rented out for her was not the best ... Sure, it was close to UA, and sure, it also had a kinda comfy bed, but it was so small. No kitchen in sight and a small closet for a bathroom. The bathroom didn't even have a light. She's never been super picky about what her parents could afford, but even she was a little put off from the whole thing. But that's fine, right? Just gives her more of a reason to succeed. All she had to do was get into the hero course and she would be able to live on campus rent-free. Then came the second road bump ... She had no idea so many people were shooting for UA. Staring at the massive crowd of people made her stomach twist and jump around like a dog doing tricks. She had never seen so many people in her life. Was half of Japan trying to get into UAS hero course? Channeling all of her courage she could muster, she pushed onto the campus grounds and joined the wave of hero hopefuls. She put all of her late night studying to good use, challenging every test with all of the attitude and spunk of a country girl. All that was left was the physical test. Beat up a bunch of robots, go home and eat celebratory matcha. Easy, right? Then here comes big road bump number 3. And she does mean big. A massive robot the size of which she has never seen. It's no wonder President Mike said to leave it alone. But sadly, with giant robots there also came giant chunks of rock. The last thing Uraraka saw was the giant robot punching a building and then darkness. Was that it then? One mistake and she ended up dead. That hardly seemed fair ... but she supposes life was never fair for her. From the darkness she saw a flickering flame. A green light in the distance, a small drop of warmth in a very cold world. She felt a wave of pain against the back of her head, a throbbing kind of hurt that made her toes want to curl, and then nothing. A numbing sensation that slowly gave way to a light that seemed to get brighter and brighter ... The last thing she heard was a gentle voice that put her at peace. It's going to be okay. Because I am here. Eyes flickering open, her hazy mind immediately thought of one thing. Everything was blurry, like looking through a grainy filter. Blinking a few times her vision started to come back to her, colors shifting and moving around her before it started to focus. Blinking a few times, the first thing she truly saw was a young man. He was about her age, with bushy green hair up top, an undercut hiding beneath. Bright beautiful green eyes stared back at her, shifting jade green like an emerald she saw once. The sun was shining against the back of his head, giving him an otherworldly golden glow. She also thought she saw cute freckles on his face, but it was hard to tell right now. Did she die? Coughing a few times she attempted to speak, her mouth opening to weakly ask, "Are you an angel?" The angel stared at her confused for a second before letting out a soft laugh. His laugh was so nice she couldn't help but let out a weak giggle as well. Shaking his head, his green hair swayed, bobbing with the motion. Setting her back down on the ground, he smiled gentle down at her. With the small amount of energy left in her body, she turned her head to see the buildings of the test exam in the background. More information slowly coming into focus in her tired, haze-filled brain. She really wasn't dead. She somehow survived a giant rock. Looking back at the smiling man, he was currently checking her for more injuries, lifting her arm to look at it before scanning the rest of her body. Heat ran up her face as he checked her out before he pulled away. If she truly wasn't dead, she wanted to know his name. Opening her mouth to ask another question, he cut her off. "No, sorry, you're not dead just yet. Just be careful when first standing up. You're going to be out of it for a bit. Walking is going to feel weird." Getting back up to his feet, he turned to 2 other people to talk to them. Their faces were blurry and hard to make out from where she was laying. "She should be okay now, but can you watch her for me? I'm going to make sure no one else is seriously hurt." An unknown voice responded. It was loud, making her squint. "Of course, we will make sure she gets properly checked out." Nodding at them, her angel stood back up and started to walk away. "No, wait, please come back. Tell me your name." She tried to speak, but nothing came out, her mouth hanging open, desperate to call out to him. "Wait, come back. Do you like matcha? We can go get matcha. Our treat." His green curly hair stood out amongst most people as he walked out of sight. Whoever he was, she hoped he got in so she could thank him properly. Her eyes slowly closed as she suddenly felt really tired. Once again she went back into darkness, except this time she was filled with a calming warmth. Soon sleep found her, embracing her in a deep sleep. She dreamed of curly hair, freckles, and kind green eyes. Heading towards where he saw him last, he limped a little as he went. Coughing black smoke came from his mouth as he looked around. It didn't help that the pain of the girl's ankle and hip was added onto his messed up shoulder. He's surprised he could even walk around right now. "Come on, where did you go, mystery man?" Looking over the wreckage of the destroyed robot, he found him. The red-haired man was laying on his back, slowly sitting up to rub at his hand. Oh good, he was okay. Waddling over to him, he called out, hoping not to spook him. "Hey, you okay over there?" Standing up, the mysterious man looked over to him and smiled to reveal rows of sharp, jagged teeth. Waving his hand, he spoke. "Hey dude, yeah, I'm okay." Sure enough, the guy looked basically okay. His hand was covered in a type of armor that was broken and flaking off, but injury-wise he looked okay. From the looks of it, he looks like he might have sprained his hand. Interesting. So he could cover himself in armor and then destroy it for explosive power. That sounds really useful. He could jump between the two depending on the situation. Shaking his head to stop himself going on a tangent, he smiled. "That's good. You saved us back there, and I don't know what I would have done if you weren't okay." "Yeah man, I saw that manly display back there and I just had to help. You were super cool, dude." Blinking a few times, he tilted his head a little. "Manly, dude, oh my god ... he's a himbo." Smiling, he reached his good hand out to him. "Izuku Midoriya." The red-haired man smiled wide with rows of shark-like teeth before taking his hand and shaking it. Ijiro Kirishima. Chuckling, he returned the smile. Glad it was all over. A pulse of pain went through him, making him groan. No, never mind, it's not all over. He was already in so much pain. On top of that, he also took that woman's pain as well, and it was all coming back to him in waves. Swaying a little, he fell back onto the ground, staring up at the sky. Exhaustion quickly came over him. His eyes were already starting to close. Through his blurry vision, he could see Kirishima screaming questions at him, shaking him with his hands. That's not what you do to someone who just collapsed. He was going about this all wrong, but he was clearly worried for him. He seemed like a nice guy, even though his power seemed bullshit.